in order to meet demographic, economic, technological, and social changes. This means that we focus on our two natural and inexhaustible resources that are innovation and creation.
Began a major transformation. We made the decision to scale up our impact for artists, arts organizations, the general public, and our current and potential partners to better fulfill our mandate. Our transformation is designed to be results-based. Over the past year, the Council has undertaken numerous consultations, and it puts us today in a position to deliver a strong and effective model for funding and supporting the arts. The first steps in the ongoing transformations are to implement first an overall way of operating that focuses on maximizing our impact, a new model for program and delivery and service delivery, improve productivity in the workforce and improve knowledge sharing, a new 5-year strategic plan. The core of this transformation, our new funding model, with its 6 programs, is simple, flexible, responsive to change, and results-based. Our strategic plan will be released in April 2016. All of the components of the transformation will be operational as of April 2017. We have been transparent in sharing our improvements on traditional and social media, and reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. We are looking to increase our impact immediately and for the future, and we are acting quickly and strategically in several ways. For example, our new program dedicated to Indigenous arts and culture is designed with an entirely Indigenous perspective. This long-standing priority has been made a policy instrument. Our new funding model gives the organizations we support the responsibility for reflecting the diversity of their community, practicing equity, and supporting linguistic duality. The flexibility of the model responds to the realities of new generations and youth. Our new program dedicated to international activities will consolidate the cultural presence of Canada on international markets. L'économie est difficilement prévisible, notamment.
It is difficult to predict the economy, particularly because of globalization. Innovation and creation are absolutely essential resources for an economy that is robust and constantly renewed. At the international level, many countries have placed arts and culture at the heart of their economic development. The repercussions of this choice are financial, social, educational, and are felt at the human level. The cultural sector has 624,000 jobs, that accounting for 3.7% of the total jobs in Canada. Culture and arts contribute to $47.7 billion in the GDP, according to a report in 2015. The arts sector is an essential engine for our cultural industries because this is where the talents, the knowledge, innovation, and content are developed, without which it is not possible for a culture to operate.
Our present and future, since they stimulate the imagination, creation, and innovation that are necessary to our well-being and our sustainable development. The Canada Council is ready to invest in the economy of the future, an economy based on rich diversity and creativity, an economy supported by the intelligence, skills, and engagements of Canada's artists and all citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being a little ahead of time. Turning to the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnership, Mr. Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, the Clerk, members of the committee, and staff. Established in 1993, the Canadian Council for Public-Private Partnerships is a national, not-for-profit, non-partisan, member-based organization with broad representation from across the public and private sectors. We're not a lobby group. We have as government as our members and as our partners. Our mission is to promote innovative approaches to infrastructure development and service delivery through P3s with all levels of government. On behalf of the Council, I'm pleased to appear before this committee for pre-budget consultations. We have submitted a fulsome brief to the committee with our recommendations. Given the tight schedule, I'll just touch on a few high-level points and look forward to your questions later. When we talk about P3s, we're generally referring to a single fixed-price contract where the private sector designs, builds, finances, maintains, and sometimes operates infrastructure on behalf of the public sector over a long-term contract, typically 25 to 35 years. It's important to note in these contracts that the ownership and control of the asset always remains with the public sector. P3s tend to be most suitable for complex projects that carry significant risk and are of a large size, greater than $50 or $100 million. We will be the first to say that P3s are not a panacea. At present, they account for approximately 10 to 15% of public infrastructure projects. But when the right project is done for the right reasons, P3s are proven to lead to higher quality infrastructure that is delivered on time, on budget, with savings to taxpayers. The transfer of risk to the private sector, putting private capital skin in the game, and taking a life cycle view of an asset leads to significantly better results. The Canadian P3 sector has been active and continues to grow, is now recognized as a best-in-class model worldwide. We now have 236 projects underway in Canada, either in operation, under construction, or in procurement, with a value of projects reaching financial close now over $93 billion. An independent economic impact assessment completed by InterVistas demonstrated in the last decade P3s created over 290,000 direct jobs, added over $25 billion to direct GDP, and saved governments $9.9 billion. Measurable results. Looking to this budget, we know, as you know, that the economy is in need of a boost, and we know that all levels of government are facing large infrastructure deficits. We support the need for short-term stimulus, and we believe a focus on infrastructure will be your best investment, even if that means running modest deficits. Our recent public opinion research confirms the vast majority of Canadians support this position. It is likely that P3s will only play a role in short-term stimulus spending where major infrastructure projects are already in the P3 procurement pipeline. Those projects should continue moving ahead under the P3 model. The Council is primarily focused not on the short term, though, but on how the government can benefit from P3s under its long-term infrastructure plan. To that end, we support the government's focus on economic, social, and green infrastructure, and I believe you'll find that P3s do have a strong track record of success in each of those sectors. Public transit, broadband, social housing, First Nations infrastructure, water and wastewater facilities are just some of the priority areas within those three categories. Our submission goes into greater detail with examples of P3 success stories across those sectors. We believe there's an opportunity with this budget to set out a long-term infrastructure plan that addresses the needs of municipalities, provinces, territories, Indigenous governments, and of course, the federal government. With decision-making on projects moving to the local level, our preference is to keep the P3 screen for projects over $100 million. But in lieu of that, if decision-making is going to a local level, the federal government ought to ensure that due diligence is happening within other levels of government, and assisting with resources if that capacity does not currently exist. It is important that communities have the capacity to make fact-based decision-making around procurement options, as time delays and cost overruns can have a significant operational impact on local governments. One needs to look no further than the traditionally procured York to Spadina subway in Toronto, which is now delayed and running $400 million over budget, leaving York Region and the City of Toronto to make up that shortfall. We know that P3s will be one of the critical tools at the government's disposal to ensure its infrastructure plan is successful, and we know Canadians understand the importance. Just this last month, we commissioned a study by Nanos Research that found 2/3 of Canadians support P3s, more than a 5% increase from our last study in late 2013. The results are not surprising. Increasingly, the successful track record of the P3 model is recognized. Our Council looks forward to working with the government over the coming years to help maximize its returns on its long-term infrastructure plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bain. Turning to the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, Mr. Morrison.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation to appear, and by the way, congratulations on your election as chair. For those of you unfamiliar with the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, CHRA is the voice of the affordable housing sector in Canada. Our members range from large and small social housing providers, all 13 provincial and territorial housing departments, municipalities, housing organizations, and supportive individuals. During last year's election campaign, members of this committee may have heard of and even participated in our Housing for All campaign, where CHRA and supporters from across the country made an impassioned plea for greater federal investment in social housing. We were very pleased to see that our messages did not fall on deaf ears, and that, as demonstrated by the deliverables contained in the Prime Minister's ministerial mandate letters, the current federal government has made investing in social housing a top budgetary priority. And to be clear, Mr. Chair, the needs are great. Over 235,000 Canadians will experience homelessness at some point this year. 1 in 4 Canadian families cannot afford the housing they're currently in. In the past 25 years, federal investment in affordable housing has decreased by 46%. Most current social housing stock is 40, 50, 60, in some cases even 100 years old, and there has not been the investment necessary to renovate that existing stock. We're now at the point where the federal operating agreements are already expiring. Over 800 agreements have already expired, and by 2040, the federal investment in social housing is set to reach zero, putting over 300,000 households at risk of eviction. En conséquence, la nécessité d'un leadership fédéral dans le domaine.
It is therefore necessary for the federal government to start showing leadership in the renewal of social housing. With a well-thought-out long-term strategic framework, it is clear that investment in social housing does make it possible for the government to achieve objectives in various areas, including the challenges facing the off-reserve Aboriginal population, economic stimulus, poverty reduction, as well as reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and to help in the resettlement of refugees.
Coalition of 7 national and provincial housing associations released a paper identifying our recommendations for the 3 areas of focus for new federal investment. These 3 areas include, first, retrofitting and rehabilitating existing social housing assets that currently provide safe and affordable homes to over 600,000 households in Canada. Second, commit to building 100,000 new social and affordable homes to reduce core housing needs and homelessness. And third, support innovation in social housing by allowing such things as refinancing of housing provider mortgages, expanding the homelessness partnering strategy, and encouraging social entrepreneurship. By using these new federal funding to invest in these key areas, the federal government would go a long way towards addressing the deficiencies that have built up in the sector. Now, in addition to these 3 areas of focus, I'd add just 3 policy principles that CHRA feels should guide policymaking when investing in social housing. En premier lieu, first
of all, although the federal government should establish principles and guidelines, main principles and guidelines, funding decisions must be taken at the local level. Social housing policy cannot be established in a single direction. Investment must take into account local needs.
From the Minister of Finance about funding for, quote, social infrastructure, under which housing is generally included. The catch is, this term has come to mean many things to many people. We're concerned that if the federal government does not provide a dedicated housing funding within the broader envelope for social infrastructure, funding will be split so many ways that its impact on social housing may be negligible. We're therefore looking for a commitment to dedicated social housing funding in the budget. And lastly, a long-term housing investment framework must be developed in a collaborative fashion. Social housing is a big tent. A long-term policy framework must be developed with the participation of all stakeholders at the table. Now, this is where our association, CHRA, is ready and willing to work with the federal government in playing a bit of a convener role across the breadth of the social housing sector, so that we can develop a collaborative, sector-wide, long-term policy approach. We hope this committee will support this need for a multi-stakeholder forum to flesh out a responsible, effective, long-term housing policy. Monsieur le Président, la politique de logement social au Canada.
Mr. Chairman, social housing policy in Canada has reached a critical point. By working together and by making judicious investments, we will be able to make a positive difference in the lives of millions of Canadians who depend on social housing. Once again, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to testify to your committee.
Turning to the Canadian manufacturers and exporters, Mr. Lavoie.
Monsieur le Président, membres du comité,
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I was very pleased to accept your invitation to present the pre-budget recommendations of the Canadian manufacturers and exporters for 2016. I'd like to wish you all an excellent parliamentary session. First of all, we wish to express our appreciation to all the political parties and the members represented here for the support that they expressed during the last election campaign. It was quite evident and was appreciated by everyone. Let me take a few minutes to present our association as the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. We represent 10,000 manufacturing and exporting companies in Canada. We were founded in 1871 as the first industrial association. In the 1990s, we merged with the Association of Exporters in view of the fact that the majority of exports, and this is still the case today, were manufactured goods. What exactly is the manufacturing sector and why is it important? It is a variety of sectors: natural resources, aeronautics, the automotive sector, agri-food processing, all of which account for 10% of the GDP. 2/3 of exports are in Canada are exports of goods manufactured in Canada. Approximately half of the total R&D expenditures come from the Canadian manufacturing sector. It is a sector that employs 1.7 million people throughout the country, earning an annual average wage of $72,500 compared to an average for all industries that is now $57,900. And it is a sector that does have spin-offs in a multitude of other sectors, including logistics, number of recommendations. The first challenge is the aging of the population, along with the decline of the workforce in certain provinces, including Quebec, that will aggravate the shortage of specialized labor in a number of sectors. Declining R&D expenditures in the private sector in Canada, particularly since the financial crisis, and also because of the significant cutbacks made to the R&D credit program following the implementation of the Jenkins report. Poor productivity, affecting the competitiveness of our businesses, particularly when it comes to exports to other countries that have a better productivity than ours, and the slow uptake in advanced manufacturing technology, and robotics, as well as additive manufacturing.
Overcome these challenges are, in our view, first, to implement a national advanced manufacturing network of excellence in the fields of automation, robotics, and additive manufacturing, similar to the United States National Networks for Manufacturing Innovation. Simplify and expand the tax credits and investment incentives to de-risk and accelerate the adoption of new technologies, which will have a positive impact on productivity and economic growth, including the re-inclusion of capital expenditures under the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Tax Credit. We think it's time for Canada to look at the potential implementation of a patent box tax regime, which would improve commercialization of technologies developed in Canada. As we say, Canada is very strong at turning money into knowledge, but kind of weak at turning knowledge into money. We strongly recommend that the government task a parliamentary committee to undertake a full review of Canada's research and development framework, with particular focus on the modernization of the SR&ED legislation, the Scientific Research Experimental Development Tax Credit. And finally, we urge the federal government to adopt a strategic procurement policy for all federally funded infrastructure projects, which would emphasize the need to maximize domestic economic benefits for the manufacturing sector, and in particular, I'm thinking about this fabricated steel products, while respecting our current international trade obligations. I'll be happy to respond to your questions a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lavoie. The Centre for the Study of Living Standards, Mr. Calvert. The floor is yours, 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. I thank the committee for inviting me to speak here today on behalf of the Centre for the Study of Living Standards. Our organization researches trends in living standards and their determinants. We advocate policies which we think will improve the quality of life of Canadians. We believe that economic growth is essential to improving aggregate well-being. Unfortunately, economic growth has been slowing in Canada. Between 1961 and 2000, Canada's real GDP grew at a rate of about 3.7% annually. From 2000 to 2014, it has grown at a rate of only 2.3%. And over the next 2 decades, we project that growth will proceed at an average rate of just 1.6%, based on Canada's dismal productivity performance in recent history and slowing employment growth as the population ages. It is critical to raise labour productivity and employment in Canada if we are to maintain the growth in our standard of living which we have become accustomed to. Last September, the Centre for the Study of Living Standards released a report offering a series of recommendations for governments to promote economic growth in Canada. I will briefly discuss the 3 central themes of our proposed growth agenda. First, growth should be inclusive. By this, we mean that living standards should rise for all Canadians and not only for a select few. Government should take action to ensure that as the cake gets larger, everybody gets a bigger slice. We believe that inclusivity is not only a desirable policy goal, but also a potential driver of growth. Segments of the population which are currently underutilized in the labour market represent opportunities to increase output. In particular, government can take action to remove barriers to the successful economic participation of women, older workers, Aboriginal people, persons with disabilities, and recent immigrants. For example, policies such as boosting the flexibility of parental leave, subsidizing childcare expenditures, neutral taxation of second income earners, and encouraging young women to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics could raise female employment rates. Similarly, tackling the social issues plaguing Aboriginal communities, closing the Aboriginal education gap, and assisting firms in engaging the Aboriginal workforce would strengthen Aboriginal labour market performance. Our second theme is that growth should be environmentally sustainable. Economic growth is important, but we shouldn't forget that it is a means to an end and not the end itself. We must satisfy our material desires in a way which protects our environment for future generations. Fortunately, there are green ways to achieve growth. We endorse the Eco-Fiscal Commission's recommendations for introducing carbon pricing throughout Canada. Substituting taxes on fossil fuel consumption for growth-retarding corporate and personal income taxes would promote economic activity while simultaneously addressing an obvious market failure. The budget should offer incentives for Canadian firms to develop and adopt green technologies and support the development of emerging green technology manufacturing industries in Canada. And there should be incentives and investment should be made in green infrastructure projects such as clean energy generation, interprovincial energy grids, public transit, and wastewater treatment facilities. Our third theme is that government should take on a more active role in the economy. Over the last several decades, governments in Canada have implemented a series of market-oriented reforms. Barriers to trade have been reduced, regulations slashed, tax rates on capital and corporate income lowered, and government ownership reduced. Most economists agreed that these reforms would generate economic growth in Canada, but the results have been disappointing. This is not to say that the reforms were ineffective, or that similar efforts along these lines are not worth pursuing. In fact, we endorse further market-oriented reforms, particularly with regards to improving taxation and lowering internal and external barriers to trade. However, the weak growth in recent years suggests that it is insufficient for government to create a level playing field and passively wait for growth to happen. To foster growth, government may need to augment markets by supporting individuals and firms in making optimal decisions. For example, government has an important role to play in providing timely, accurate, and high-quality labour market information to students, workers, and firms. Government also can serve a mentorship role to small and medium-sized businesses by providing advice on investment and technological adoption, or by assisting businesses in navigating complex international trade rules and securing deals with foreign firms and clients. In conclusion, encouraging growth which is inclusive and sustainable should be a priority of the 2016 budget. I thank all who are present for their attention and look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Calvert. With the Child Care Advocacy Association of Canada, Ms. Ballantyne.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. We'll be forwarding a written submission in French and English early next week to expand on my brief remarks this afternoon. For 30 years, our association has called on our Parliament to commit federal funds to build a comprehensive, high-quality, universal, and inclusive childcare system. We're appearing once again before you, this time with renewed hope that this newly reconstituted House will answer our call. For 2016-2017, we're looking for a modest federal investment in childcare. $100 million for Indigenous communities to design, deliver, and govern early childhood education, that meets their needs, and that's consistent with related recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And secondly, we're requesting $500 million as a federal transfer to provinces and territories for targeted childcare initiatives. In future needs and in future years, and in order to meet the government's election platform commitments, federal transfers will have to increase. All federal transfers, whether short-term and long-term, must be spent in ways that are evidence-based and publicly accountable. We distinguish between short-term funding and increased funding over longer term because we want the federal government to move along two tracks simultaneously. First, we want the government to take immediate steps to address urgent childcare priorities such as affordability, developing the childcare workforce, and meeting the needs of harder-to-serve populations such as rural communities. At the same time, the federal government must collaborate with other levels of government, Indigenous organizations, and childcare organizations to develop and implement a robust, shared policy framework that would guide increased public investments over time. The Prime Minister has mandated the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development and the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs to develop such a national early learning and childcare framework. Our organizations and 3 other important national organizations have developed a vision for this framework, a vision that has already received widespread support and endorsement in the childcare sector. It's our proposed framework that guides our thinking about federal childcare investments, and we have given copies of this shared framework to this committee for your consideration. There's no time now to elaborate on our proposed framework. I'll just say that if our proposed approach is adopted, Canada can achieve within 1 decade an ECE system that provides affordable access to a high-quality space for every child whose parents choose such an option. I'll use my remaining time to highlight 3 reasons for prioritizing childcare funding in this year's budget. First, taking action on childcare is broadly supported. In the 2015 federal election, most political parties made childcare commitments in their platforms. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommends culturally appropriate early childhood education programs for Indigenous families as part of a healing and reconciliation. The recent meeting of the federal, provincial, and territorial ministers responsible for childcare has also created important momentum. It's clear that new federal childcare transfers will be welcomed. Second, action on childcare is urgently needed. Families across the country, and by extension their employers and also their communities, are struggling. Parent fees are unaffordable, and they're increasing at rates that outpace inflation. Childcare is not available. More than 70% of mothers are employed, but only 24% of children in the ages of up to 5 years have access to spaces in centers. The quality of care is inconsistent, and there's limited integration of care and education. Full school day kindergarten in several provinces has important benefits. All children in those provinces have the legislated right to participate. They're taught by teachers who are educated at post-secondary levels and who earn decent wages, and there are no direct parent fees. But a full-day kindergarten does not address childcare needs outside of school hours or of children under the age of 5. We also have the problem of low public funding. Canada's public spending on childcare, expressed as a percentage of GDP, is extremely low by OECD and other international standards. Finally, action on childcare has important social and economic benefits. Childcare promotes social inclusion, it combats child and family poverty, and it promotes women's equality. But childcare spending also provides important economic stimulus by creating jobs, allowing parents, particularly women, to work, and supporting local economies through local spending. Importantly, the failure to address families' childcare struggles will limit the reach of other federal economic initiatives. For example, job creation initiatives will be hampered if workers don't also have access to affordable childcare. The urgency of acting decisively on early childhood education and care cannot be overstated. We urge you to recommend that the federal government take action in the next budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Valentine. We'll revert back to a 7-minute round. Mr. Graywell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the panelists for your testimony today. I'm going to start with Mr. Bain. I really appreciate your testimony, and just on the focus on public-private partnerships. And it's been said that a lot of the Fortune 500 in Canada is sitting on a lot of cash, and they're not spending it. Can I get your perspective on how we can get that money into financing more infrastructure projects as the government is set to announce this massive infrastructure investment this year?
Sure, thank you for the question. And you're right, there is a lot of private capital available, and the Fortune 500 companies, of course, have a lot of it. I think they are more inclined to reinvest likely in their own enterprises. But there are a lot of natural infrastructure investors, and those would include the major Canadian pension funds, as well as the specialty equity investors. And I think they are really just looking for an opportunity to invest. They like the asset class, they like dealing with government, and they particularly enjoy the long-term stable cash flow that is associated with these projects. So it may come from different sources, but I think we are not currently short of capital. We're just short of meaningful opportunities into which it can be deployed.
Thank you. So this committee has heard a lot about shovel-ready and shovel-worthy projects, and there's a debate going on how important infrastructure investment is and the impact it will have on the economy in the long term. And there's other people's opinion that infrastructure investment is very short-term oriented stimulus to the economy. What's your perspective on that?
Well, of the three priorities that you have for economic, green, and social infrastructure, clearly all have short-term economic benefits in terms of construction activity and other activity to get the infrastructure prepared. The long-term benefits, I think, are proven as well. Certainly in the case of the economic infrastructure, bringing goods, ideas, and people to market really is just an incredibly important economic activity, and that's beyond stimulus. That is long-term economic health.
Thank you. Mr. Morrison, on affordable housing, so again, on infrastructure and the government's commitment on social infrastructure in particular, the Minister of Infrastructure has made a point of saying that this year, retrofit projects like affordable housing will be the #1 priority. And I know in the GTA there's a big shortage, and the minister has been down there to talk to the local mayors to ensure that they are applying for the funding, and we're getting these projects in time for the 2016 construction season. Your perspective on how that will alleviate some of the pressures in that area?
And let me first of all just say on the question of shovel-worthy, shovel-ready projects, we've been asked the question, does the social housing sector have those type of projects ready to go? And let me state equivocally, absolutely yes, si, oui, ya, however you can say it. The social housing sector is ready to retrofit. They are ready to rehabilitate. We understand that there's possibly going to be an angle regarding green infrastructure, energy retrofits. Absolutely, we are ready to work with governments in that area. But regarding that stimulus impact, you mentioned the GTA. Just in the city of Toronto right now, there is a waiting list for affordable housing approaching over 90,000 households, not individuals, but households. So clearly the need is great. And that's for new builds. There are still 600,000 households in Canada that live in the existing social housing sectors. As I said in my notes, many of those buildings are over 50, 60. I toured one building that was over 100 years old here in Ottawa. There has simply not been that level of retrofit investment necessary to keep those buildings up to code. And, frankly, I would just ask any of us here, for example, who own our own homes, what would you do if you went 50 years without putting any money into the rehabilitation of that home? It wouldn't be a very good place to live. So clearly that's money that is necessary. It will have a stimulus effect. The projects are ready to go. So again, we look forward to working with government to make them happen.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. And a follow-up. As there's short supply of affordable housing across the nation, what are in your perspective, the macro effects on the economy that kind of drive out of that? if the government doesn't do this investment?
Right, and there's been all kinds of socioeconomic studies that have been done showing the impact on the economy, on individuals, on families of lack of affordable housing. It goes to the heart of inability to have education, inability to hold a job, family breakups, obviously impacts on poverty and so forth. So, when we look at the number, at the waiting list by municipalities, and so again, Toronto, 90,000, Montreal, approximately 25,000 on a waiting list. These are people who are either living in substandard housing or frankly who are not living in, or who simply do not have housing whatsoever. It's pretty hard to get a job or to train for a job or to get education when you're frankly just worried about where you're going to be sleeping that night. So, the impacts are very clear, measurable. We'd be happy to provide the committee with some of those examples. But, again, as I said in my notes, the return on investment of housing goes well beyond the bricks and mortars. It goes to the very heart of the economy and social benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. And flipping right back to Mr. Bain, in your perspective, how can the P3 formula be improved?
That's a good question. I mean, we're very happy with the success that we have had. I think in order to achieve dramatic expansion, I mean, perhaps really if improve is get more infrastructure delivered, I think we need more private capital at work, and that is probably increasing the role of the active repeat members in the community. So the Infrastructure Ontario, the partnerships, BC, and the equivalents in Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Quebec, to get them moving, and that probably means a more predictable deal flow. And for the sectors that are quite underrepresented, so for example, the Indigenous communities, I think that means establishing a stable, long-term funding flow that to date has been piecemeal, intermittent, and short-term. So long-term commitment to these projects will be met with long-term delivery of infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Graywell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Turning to Ms. Raitt.
I guess, Mr. Bain, we'll go back to you on P3s. As you know, one of the projects that I was involved in is the Gordie Howe Bridge. Can you give me an update on what effect the lower Canadian dollar has had on the costs associated with the Gordie Howe Bridge? Are you aware of the currency change having had an effect on what we're looking at in terms of project cost?
I'm not, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there's a Canadian and a U.S. aspect to it, but the project is at an early stage. Shortlist has been announced, so yeah. I really have not heard recent cost updates.
Okay, good. One thing I heard from the Canadian Pension Plan when I asked the same question about infrastructure and investment, why don't you invest more in Canada? I'm hearing that it's because the projects are too small and that there's an encouragement to bundle up to a level of their floor. Their floor is over $100 million. They look at big projects and they do it all over the world. So are you encountering that in terms of the uptake, and should the government be encouraged to bundle up wastewater treatment or to make more sense of these projects so that we can get some private investment in there?
It's a great conundrum because, of course, we see some of our leading Canadian infrastructure investors, CPP and OMERS and teachers, and the Caisse de dépôt, investing huge sums of money overseas and not domestically. And you're quite right that part of the reason is they just can't get the bite size. Yeah. So that's a consequence of two things. The individual projects tend to be smaller in Canada than in developing nations or nations with great concentration. And also it is a factor that we have optimized the way in which we deliver P3s, so they're quite highly leveraged. So there's a significant amount of debt capital rather than equity capital in them. That makes the equity bites relatively small. Bundling is one idea. Looking at a different way of financing the project, so there is either a larger equity component or a larger pension fund contribution to the debt component, are both ways of going at it. But I do feel we have the small project issue sort of compounded by the fact that only a small component of the project size is equity. Yeah,
good point. Thank you very much. Ms. Rowe, thank you very much for coming here, and thank you for all the work you've been doing with the Canadian Council for the Arts. I'm curious, two questions for you. The first one has to do with the currency as well, whether or not do you see, with the Canadian dollar being lower, that it's helping the arts community, and I'm thinking about film and production and television. Do you see that happening right now? Is it before?
Actually, it's playing both ways. So if you are, going international, or if you are having artists coming, if you're an opera company and you're signing with artists, international artists. So I think in general terms, there's some kind of a new equilibrium that is happening.
Okay.
So depending on which sector you're talking about, it has different impacts. I think it's clear that now there's a big demand all over the world for artistic products, artistic performers, and it's a good time to export more. And for cultural exports, it's really a good time now.
And you represent the government's public support for it. Is there private investment out there that does art supporting as well? And what does that look like as a sector?
Sorry, I just...
Private donations, private investment in the arts.
Private donations in the arts are quite stable. What we see now is that the trend is that the donations are coming more and more from individuals and less from corporations, because there's a shift in terms of corporations that are going more towards other parts of charity. But clearly, there's a strong support from individual donors.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lavoie from manufacturing, wondering how important is the oil and gas sector to your membership? Is that a big piece of what manufacturers and exporters do in Canada?
It's a big piece. It's a piece also we've seen in the drop of the oil price and the drop of activity. We've seen an impact on sales, in domestic sales and manufacturing. So it does impact, because many companies, many of our members, especially in Southern Ontario, had started to look at oil and gas to become a supplier there. Now they're stuck into maybe going back to something more traditional, but it's very difficult to know right now what's going to happen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And Mr. Culver, what would be your organization's opinion on guaranteed annual income as a concept in Canada?
We're open-minded about it. I personally think that it's something we should be looking into, but we don't have an official stance on it.
Right. We had a deputy this morning who talked about the government should put aside some money to do a study, some pilot projects across the country on the topic. Your organization would be interested in something like that?
I think that would be a fantastic idea. I think it's something that merits looking into.
Okay. I still have time?
Good time for one quick one.
Fantastic. So the last question then, I guess, the Canadian Housing and Renewal. Maybe you can help me with something. So I had a great discussion with my regional council with respect to affordable housing and seniors housing. And we did a lot of building in the past together when we funded some seniors units. But they told me that they would prefer just to have funds as opposed to funds dedicated and telling them to build affordable housing. Is that just something that's happening in my region, or is the method of delivery more preferable, just give the money and decisions are made whether or not to build new stock, or is there something else that's going on out there? I'm trying to figure out if this is across municipalities or just specific to our region.
Right. Very quickly, Mr. Chair, I mean, the needs are so great in social housing right now. As I said in my remarks, rehabilitation and renewal of existing stock, the need for new units, incremental units, the need to look at some social innovative ways to get out of operating agreements once they expire. So at this point, most housing providers in Canada would be happy taking any of the above in terms of funding, whether it's dedicated in one of those areas, or of course, whether it would be a more global fund. I don't think there would be any opposition to that. But if there were strings attached in one of those specific areas identified, there's been no housing provider that I've talked to that has any concerns with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bottin-Sweet, 7 minutes.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. As a spokesperson for housing, I think that you will understand that I'll be putting my questions to Mr. Morrison, and a few minutes for my colleague, Mr. Nantel, as well. We talked about the construction of social housing, and you said that there's a great deal of need. In Toronto, 90,000, and in Montreal, 25,000. You talked about the end of the operating agreements between the Centre Mortgage and Housing Agency. In my constituency in Hochelaga, there are 58 housing units that will be affected by the termination of the agreements. And the average rate of increase in rental in Quebec will be $250 from one month to another then. Can you tell me what will happen to these households? They are usually the poorest in the short term, and if the funding for these agreements is not renewed. Thank you, Ms. Boutin-Sweet, and I'd like to thank you for all the support that you've given to our sector. I'll answering you in English.
Said that has already begun. We've already seen approximately 800 agreements expire just in the past year or so. Providers are essentially looking and scratching their head and figuring, what do we do now? There's been a lot of work that's been undertaken by individual providers and hopefully trying to scale that up to look at some innovative solutions to diversify the operations of social housing units such that they can continue to operate subsidized housing for their tenants. So, for example, we're seeing the use of greater use of mixed income units. We're seeing possibly commercial space. And I should add, and this ties back to the conversation that was just had regarding the private equity funds and the private market. You know, there's some proposals that are now starting to be developed, including a proposal that will be going to the Gouvernement du Québec to use or to try and leverage private equity to essentially bring that into the social housing sphere. In other words, to use some of that private money to try and use that for social infrastructure. Quebec is going to be recommending a proposal in that area. So there are innovative solutions on a more local and grassroots level that are occurring. There are more that are being looked at as providers are looking into the future and realizing their expiries are coming up. But what we need, and this goes to our third recommendation, is essentially an ability and some capacity to scale up some of those innovative solutions. One of the deliverables, for example, from the mandate letters was the concept of an infrastructure bank. And could that potentially be another source to diversify the operation of social housing? So there are several options that are being implemented, being considered, being studied. But essentially, we need to scale those up. We need to leverage those so that they're not just grassroots initiatives. They can be copied. They can be essentially, the best practices can be shared from across the country.
Personnellement, moi, j'ai vu la perte de certaines unités.
Personally, I've seen the loss of a number of units. So once the agreements expired in Sudbury, I can remember several years ago, there were 2 units that were lost completely because it was impossible to pay for these units. Is this the type of thing that you think might happen? Yes. If they're not able to make use of other solutions.
When that happens, then we start seeing evictions. We see increases in homelessness. We see people that really have no other choice. And clearly, that's a last resort. That's the last thing we want to see. But it is happening. And clearly, I think for this government, for any government that understands the value of housing as an enabler for education, for job creation, etc., that's not a solution that we want to see pursued.
Merci, Mr. Morrison. Je vais passer la parole à mon collègue.
Mr. Morrison, I'd like to give the rest of my time to Mr. Nantel. Thank you to my colleague, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming here. It's quite exciting to see how, after an election, we can hear people come and ask for people to live up to their promises. I'd like to say to you, Mr. Morrison, these are very serious issues. Even in Longueuil, there was an incident that occurred this morning where we received a delegation from Longueuil. They will be going to the 25th and 26th to Geneva, where Canada will have to explain its position on social housing. I'd like to salute Mr. Brault. I think that there is probably unanimity about your management among all the parties. With the additional funding that will be made available to you, we hope. Promises were made to this effect. I'd like to know what type of concrete impact have you already started elaborating some type of flowchart? We'll be looking very closely at the budget to see what is made available. The Minister of Heritage is mandated to double the budget of the Canada Council for the Arts. What I've constantly been saying is that new investments will be made according to the logic of this new funding model. It is clear that what is at issue for us is we will not be repeating the formulas used in the past, but we will have new types of funding models that will make it possible for us to acquire a new generation, to have a new type of a business model, different from the past, a more collaborative one, and not necessarily require young artists to create new structures and new nonprofit organizations unendingly, because the way in which art is being distributed and is being created now is quite different from what it was 60 years ago. What we are attempting to do then is when we look at the present day situation, we're talking about an economy of $4.7 billion, and there are 130,000 artists at the heart of this economy, and a large number of them are affected directly by the Canada Council. They have a key role to play. They are the ones who develop the content. They are poorly paid at the present time. They find themselves in a situation where, as a result of the development of digital technology, we need models that are better adapted to the present situation. So if there are new investments made in the Canada Council, we hope to have a positive impact for at least one generation by changing the way in which we can provide support and being much closer to creators and their needs and how they create.
Before I turn to Stephen, Jeff, on these 800 agreements that have expired, are you talking co-op housing agreements, or what specifically agreements are you talking about?
Principally co-op housing, but there is somewhat of a mix, but the vast majority of those 800 are co-ops, yes.
And the reason they're expiring?
When they were negotiated, most operating agreements would have been negotiated between CMHC and individual providers in the 60s, 70s, 80s, generally for a long-term commitment. And frankly, the time is up for these agreements without a renewal of them. And so we're seeing, again, that between essentially now and 2040, we're seeing that long-term date of expiration.
Okay. Mr. McKinnon, you had a point of order, or what's on your mind?
I'd like to clarify that point because I worked on this file.
Okay, we'll give you 30 seconds. Go
the
ahead.
reason they're expiring is the mortgages have been paid off.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. McKinnon.
Merci. Peut-être ça plaira à M. Nantel. Je veux continuer.
It might be good for Mr. Nantel. I will continue with a question from Mr. Brown. I'd like to join in congratulating my colleagues. We are the Finance Committee, and of course, we are focusing on the economic contribution, the possibilities of growth, and so forth. But I would like to salute in passing the Canada Council, not only for its economic contribution, but for its cultural contribution. And I think that you have quite eloquently presented the argument that both can go together. And in a digital situation, I think that this is very often the case, that the two go together. You talk about the strategic transformation of your organization, our organization, because it belongs to all Canadians, and the possibility of increased investment in the next budget. I'd like to know whether you can talk tangibly about what type of contribution this might have, in addition to cultural and economic ones. What other types of repercussions do you see? When we talk about the economic and cultural contribution, the two are intrinsically linked, as you say. Very often people think that things can be created very quickly and can be rapidly disseminated, and the success is easy to achieve. But when we see the something is truly successful on the internet, it's because the quality of production is flawless and very convincing. And we believe then that the excellence of creation is something essential, as opposed to the multiplication of artists. And we think it is important then to provide organizations to have a certain capacity. We have to be able to buy more time for artists so that they can create and they can achieve production levels that are competitive internationally. A number of organizations in the past have reduced their casting to a very large extent and their production, and they are less competitive as a result on the international scene. So what we consider to be important is to make investments in quality and to encourage the sector to make adaptations, to adapt itself to digital technology. The United Kingdom had a strategy 10 years ago to enable the artistic sector to adapt to digital situation. In Canada, we've overlooked this, and I think it's very important for us to be able to do this, that become more easily discovered with different types of methods of engagement with the public and international distribution. And the good news here is that very often within insufficient means, Canada has been able to shine on the international scene from a cultural and artistic point of view, and we think that there is a potential so that we can achieve even more with very significant repercussions, social and economic. One question, a short question. When we're talking about the impact, the economic impact of investments in culture among the young people, would it be reasonable to assume that disproportionately investments in culture are likely to favor a reduction in unemployment, particularly among youth? I think that there are two aspects that are quite clear whenever there's an investment in culture. First of all, money circulates very quickly. This is a sector that is unable to save, and the money is spent very quickly. All the economic models have shown that in the production of arts, this is something that is done at a local level. It has an immediate effect at the local level. These are jobs where there is a desire for young people to participate. People who are involved in arts at this level are very enthusiastic. And I think that investments in arts will create direct jobs among artists and indirectly among service providers. And I would say that when we're talking about cultural industries, publishing, film, and so forth, these industries will perform as long as there is original content. So, of course, this is going to have a significant economic impact when it comes to jobs. I'd like to pass to production, from cultural production to production in general, Mr. Lavoie. We often hear that the balance sheets of our Canadian companies, whether we're talking about exporters, manufacturers, or others, are in relatively good health, but that the investments have not necessarily been following. I'd like you to clarify what the position of your organization is on this particular point. Is this true? Have you perceived an increase in investment, whether capital investments or exporting capacity or innovative capacity? Have you noted any improvements in this respect, and what are your prospects here? There have been a number of significant changes in capital investments when appreciated depreciation was put in effect by the government, but when in an economy when the industrial capacity is in excess of 60%, then normally there's a greater attempt to increase the capacity of factories. We've reached 84%, and we haven't seen the same what we would have expected. Many of our manufacturing companies own American firms. They invest money, but not necessarily in Canada. In aeronautics, for example, they invested in new plants in the United States, even though there was a capacity level in Canada that was under 60%. So this would appear to be an environment that is not particularly attractive for certain sectors when it comes to investment in Canada. Another factor that was raised by the study on economic prosperity in Ontario mentioned the fact that many foreign companies have subsidiaries in Canada, having put a lot of their profits in Canada because of the fact that taxation levels are lower, so that may have an effect as well.
5 minutes rounds, turning to Mr. McCollum.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I'd like to start out my time by just clarifying the record on an exchange I had this morning with Jeannie Baldwin, the from the Public Service Alliance of Canada. And in that discussion, I asked the question about sick leave days, public versus private, and did a bit of research since the time we've spoke. And there's quite a bit of data out there, but probably the two that are the most reliable would be the Treasury Board and the Labour Force survey data that peg the public service takes 12.4 days a year versus the private sector at 8.3, so about a 4.1 spread. And then the other one that I think actually weighs in a little heavier is perhaps the nonpartisan research organization, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, because they have no political allegiances, and they said that their analysis is that public servants took 10.5 days a year and the private sector 6.4. So again, about the similar spread. And I just want to put that on the records, if you don't mind, Chair, because the answer to the question was that there is no difference between the two. These are two very respected bodies that serve us here in Ottawa, and they both say there is a significant spread. So I want to clarify that.
I don't hear any point of order not to let
Thank
you put it there, so it is a matter of debate, and it is in the record.
It's on the record.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Now, moving to Mr. Morrison on social housing or public housing, just curious to know how much is the ask of the government for the program that you're outlining? What's the total ask?
Right. So, Mr. Chair, the ask regarding renewal and rehabilitation of existing stock is approximately $1.7 billion per year. The ask regarding the 100,000 new homes is approximately $1.5 billion per year. And what we call sector transformation or sector innovation to diversify sort of post-operating agreement is roughly $200 million. Now, part of this, of course, would be taken from the existing envelope. So this is not necessarily new money, but given what the government has spoken of regarding the size of the social infrastructure pot, we think this is reasonable.
So you just made a comment there that I just want to be sure I'm clear on. Is that you're saying there's already an envelope that includes this money, so it's not new money?
So right at present, the government funds through its operating agreements approximately $1.6 billion in social housing. But again, as we've talked about, those agreements are set to expire over the next 20-some years. So rather than see that money essentially disappear, what we're asking is for essentially a continuation and a reinvestment in both renewal, rehabilitation, and then in building up new stock. But there would be significant new money that we're also seeking.
Okay. Now, when I studied the agreements were by the CMHC and the government to provide to a cooperative or a public housing provider to provide for the operational costs of the project or the development, was to provide the money to pay the mortgage, was provided the money to provide for maintenance of the property. All of those things were in the line items of those agreements. And so when you talk about, and I've talked to many social housing providers about this, when they're governed by a governance body for that development, let's say a board of directors for XYZ co-op, they had money in each of those years to maintain the properties in good shape, to spend capital expenditures on things like roofs and such, and all the while the mortgage was being paid down, and that was all funded in the operating agreement. Am I misleading or correct on that?
So, Mr. Chair, first of all, I guess it would be important to note that there's no one standard operating agreement. There's no template agreement. Every operating agreement has a different approach, has a different mix of what is covered. Some, to your point earlier, you are correct in saying that essentially agreements would pay the mortgage. I should add at what are today would be considered extremely high interest rates. Most long-term mortgages that providers are paying are at an 8% interest rate. When I think anybody here who would pay 8% for example, a home mortgage would be crazy. There is some agreements for some operational and some for, although I should add very little for maintenance, renewal, rehabilitation, et cetera. So those are areas that essentially have been flagged as needing some significant reinvestment. And we should add that when essentially the federal government got out of the business of constructing new units back in approximately the early 90s, we essentially saw no new additions, at least from a federal perspective, to the existing stock. So that's why we're seeking, and it's, of course, as we all know, needs have grown. So that's why we're seeking those new units to be built to the existing stock.
You're out of time, Mr. McCollum and Mr. Sorbera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we'll do a trio here. First, on P3s. In Ontario, we've achieved great success through the P3 programs. I do want to add in Vaughan and next to my riding, about 100 meters away, the request for proposals for the new Mackenzie Vaughan Hospital. The request for proposals are out now, and we're going to hope to see construction started of the new hospital this year, and it'll obviously be done through P3 financing. So it's a great financing vehicle. It's been proven to come in on time and on budget. And stuff. So I do wanted to make that plug because I think it's very important to point out. Manufacturing. I come from a riding where we have many successful manufacturers. In fact, FedDev was in my riding last week, and we presented one of my manufacturers with a grant and so forth. My question is this: I can look to two entities in my riding. There's a company called Micron Group of Companies, and Vision Group. Both are Canadian success stories. Both export over 50% of their products to the United States. They're hiring, they're investing, and my concern is we're not seeing enough of that in our manufacturing sector in Ontario. So if you could, Martin, point out 2 or 3 things that you think would help our manufacturing sector.
Yep.
That we can do. I think that would be great. And then I'll move on to housing after Martin speaks.
I'm sure these two companies are highly R&D intensive if
Yes.
they export to the U.S. What we've seen hurting companies across the board of manufacturing is, as I said in my introduction, the cuts to the research and development tax credit. In 2013, 2014, the tax credit has went down from 20 to 15% for large corporations, and the capital expenditure was eliminated from the eligibility criteria. As you know, innovation in manufacturing, it's not like in any other sectors, software or services, it's very capital intensive. So I found what we're lacking now is a good incentive for capital expenditures, either for R&D or for automation. Because our productivity is lacking. And that's the second point I want to make. We need to start looking at productivity as a long-term solution to our demographics problems. And that goes through skills, but that also goes through capital expenditure. So automation and industrial robotics is coming. We've seen it. We've seen it, a lot of discussion at Davos. And we need, it's not a do it or down, it's a do it or die. So we need a strategy to improve productivity in all sectors, including manufacturing.
No, I appreciate your comments on productivity. I've kind of thumped all week about how productivity will allow us to maintain and improve our standard of living. It's not the productivity. What does it mean? It means a lot of things, but it means us living a more richer life and leaving a better future for our children. I do think we should have some more best practices for manufacturers. I think we need to do that. I'm proud to say that our government is focused on an innovation agenda. That's the way we need to go. It's we need to compete, and we're competing globally every day. On to housing. I believe that's I lost my train of thought there for a second. Mr. Morrison, on housing, what are your thoughts on, we have a lot of old housing stock in the GTA, and that needs to be refurbished and energy retrofitted. I think that's a great idea to put for some infrastructure spending. We can do it now. It's shovel-worthy and shovel-ready, even though it's an existing brownfield site, if I can use that terminology. And I think it's a great idea. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
And Mr. Chair, what I'd say on that is we're ready to go. There are no shortage of projects across the country that, again, we'll use that terminology, that are shovel-worthy. There would be no shortage of projects that could have an energy efficiency or some sustainability angle to them. The needs are great out there, so absolutely, we're ready to go with those projects.
And if I can, one last question, Mr. Chair, for Mr. Morrison. Is there anything you can recommend in York region where I come from? There isn't that existing housing stock as there such as in the city of Toronto to the degree. where we could potentially entice the private sector, the private developers to work on the public side? Is there anything there on your agenda that addresses that?
That's been a really key and interesting question for a lot of municipalities in Canada, is how to essentially incent or entice private developers to include an element of social housing within private builds. Clearly, the rental market has been somewhat on the decline. There's not a lot of builders that are into the rental market these days. There have been some municipalities that have essentially mandated that private development needs to include a certain percentage of units set aside for social housing. Clearly, we would support that, and we would encourage other municipalities to consider doing so. There's also, going to be, if we look, for example, like in a city like Ottawa, where we have a light rail transit project that's about to be going, that creates billions of dollars of value in the land surrounding that LRT project. If developers, private developers, are essentially looking to develop on those lands, and that's going to be valuable land, it's a prime opportunity for the city, in this case, to essentially require that, again, a certain percentage of those new units be set aside. We see it as a win-win project. Development, the private sector is still going to be doing very well, but it also helps meet the needs of the social sector.
Mr. Severa, Mr. Leibert.
Just a couple of questions to Mr. Lavoie. I'm going to ask you a question, and then I want to sort of explain what I mean by the question. On average, how modern is our manufacturing industry in Canada? And the reason I ask that question is because there's this belief that the lower Canadian dollar helps exports and manufacturing, and I don't quarrel with that. But the other side of the equation that I've heard is that if manufacturing wants to expand and create additional jobs, most of what they have to purchase is outside of our country, so they're paying foreign dollars for any upscaling of their production facilities. Can you make a comment on that?
Yeah, you're quite right. One of the answers I gave when I get this question is that I don't know any exporters who don't have to import something to fabricate what they export. Yeah. That being said, the labor costs are usually the biggest cost of the biggest input in what you make. So labor costs are still in Canadian dollars. So there is a kind of a gravy effect of the lower dollar just there. Now, keep in mind, labor costs are not what they were back 20 years ago or 15 years ago when the dollar was at 64 cents. Labor costs are now higher per unit produced in Canada than they are in the United States. It used to be lower back in the days. So the positive effect of the lower dollar is offset by higher labor cost. If you want to expand, we also need to have the right skills for our labor, and that's something we see. We don't have a lack of people who want to work. We have a lack of skilled people who want to work.
What would be some of the major skills that you're lacking?
I'll give you an example, very simple. There's one emerging field of workers that is required, especially in companies like, for example, Siemens. German companies in automation and software is mechatronics. Mechatronics is a combination of electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and IT. Well, right now, if you train students at university, you would train an electrical engineer, mechanical engineer. You're not going to give an overview of the three disciplines. So what Siemens did, they started their own academy. So they just assigned one college, Seneca College in Ontario, to start a mechatronic program. So because they need people who have the skills in those three disciplines. That's only one example. Another example I want to give you is the CNC machinist, right? It used to be kind of a job for, don't want to go to university, do that, and that's a great job for middle-class people like my father and many other people. I was talking to somebody at Sheridan College who said that now the machinist needs 80% of the machinists need strong mathematics and knowledge of IT and software. So it's no longer kind of job you do because you don't want to go to college. Actually, you need to go to college if you want to do this job.
Okay. Briefly, Mr. Bain, I have to admit I don't know the Canada. Well, actually, I know what your organization represents, but what I don't understand is you made a couple of comments, or one comment that caught my attention is that you said something about the fact that public-private partnership facilities all remain owned by government, was it?
No, that's correct.
So is that part of the mandate?
That is part of the Canadian model that the private sector will have access to a piece of land or perhaps to a facility for a period of time to carry on its operations, but ownership and control of the facility remains.
Is that something that you would see changing? Because a true public-private partnership can very well be something that is owned and operated by the private sector, but the services are publicly delivered. I take as an example a hospital.
It could be that way. That's not part of the current Canadian model, but anything is possible. Any configuration is possible.
Any thoughts on whether it could be changed?
Well, we would usually see in the Canadian model, we'd call what you're talking about closer to privatization, which we'd say is beyond the bounds of public-private partnership. But any configuration of public and private sector owning, operating, providing services is in theory possible. It depends on the public policy of the day.
You're about out of time. Can we have the researchers get us that? I'm not sure they call it definition, but I would like to see that spelled out, public-private partnership myself, if we can have the researchers get that for the...
Because, Mr. Chair, I think there are some opportunities for that to be expanded.
Turning to Mr. Ouellette.
Yes, thank you very much for everyone for coming. I really appreciate the opportunity to question some of you. I guess my first question will be for Mr. Simon Brault. It's the Canada Council for the Arts does actually have a bit of an elitist, perhaps. What's the word I would use? Myth around it. But could you tell us, is it actually an elitist organization? Like, how many artists do you actually touch, and is it easy for artists to actually gain access to some of these funds?
It's not easy. I mean, we're supporting every year, like 2,000 artists, more or less, and 2,000 organizations, 5,000 artists and 2,000 organizations. It's not easy because it's highly competitive. So it's not because it's elitist, but the awarding of grants are made with recommendation coming from peer assessment. So it's artists coming together from all over the country and assessing what are the most promising projects. So in a sense, it's not elitist because the rule is, the authenticity and the talent and the vision that is in the project, and not, what is your social background and all of that. I guess when people think about arts as elitist, they are more referring to some arts form like opera and classical music and all of that traditionally have been kind of offered to patrons with means, but it's something that is absolutely changing right now. There's a huge trend for democratization of culture. So I would not qualify that as elitist.
So if you actually did get more funding, is there a means for instance, in the Social Sciences and Human Research Council, they have Young Researcher Awards where they can actually gain access to more of those funds. And do you have that as well?
Yeah, we want to do that. Right now, like last year, we have 25% of any grant recipient that were grant recipients for the first time. So there's a renewal. So there's an access for youth. I guess what will change in the future is that we want to come with different models in terms of support. For example, we want to, for the first time, to be able to offer to young artists multi-years projects. So it's not, so it's predictable. And that would not force young artists to create organizations that become kind of a core funded by the Canada Council. So we're finding new ways that are more adapted to the way this generation is creating right now.
And you also speak about new Aboriginal programming. And what type of organizations do you support? What type of activities? And I'm thinking in this, there's a lot of Aboriginal people, and culture is culture. But Western culture has its own traditions, and Indigenous culture has their own. And would, for instance, powwows be now eligible to receive funding under that new program?
With the new program, what we did, because Canada Council has had an Aboriginal office for 20 years, what we're announcing now is that there will be a program dedicated to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit artists, and that this program will be informed by self-determination. So it means that this program will have features that are completely unique to the program, like microgrants, like the possibility of funding elders, transmission in terms cultural transmission. So we're really moving from a way to support Aboriginal art that has been quite influenced by Eurocentric models to a model that will be more kind of a self-determined.
And my final question is for Mr. Morrison. So, I just fail to understand with social housing, the needs seem to be staying the same, but yet we pay the mortgage, we pay some of the maintenance costs, we pay a subsidy for low-income people, and it seems that you're asking that we keep these, and yet you have this opportunity to pay off the mortgage over the course of 30 to 40 years. And what I'd want to see is a building and expansion. We've given people a chance to do what it is they're supposed to be doing, managing their things appropriately. And if they haven't done so, the government can't hold people's hands. And my issue, I think, sometimes with social housing is, my ideal is to expand it. And this is what I'm looking for, and this is what I'm looking for from the partners, I think, that are going to be partnering with the government, is really making sure that we get more social housing for more people in this country who actually need it.
Sure, and if I may, Mr. Chair, we fully agree. One of our 3 key asks was to look at 100,000 new social housing units across Canada to meet the growing needs. And let's face it, all you have to do is read the paper any day of the week, and you see what's happening with housing prices in the private market in Canada, in Vancouver and Toronto, et cetera. The private market is not going to be able to meet the needs of the lower income half of our population in this area. I would just, one last point though, you mentioned that, although you support the expansion of social housing, and obviously we do as well. But I think there's also a number of really innovative programs within social housing units that are designed to actually get people out of social housing. Ultimately, in the housing spectrum, it's advantageous to see people move into into a higher income bracket and therefore move into the private market. That's clearly not possible for everybody, but there's some really interesting models in that respect. I know that clearly social housing is a need for many Canadians, but I think many providers also understand the value in seeing people ultimately move on. And so income supplement programs, educational programs, et cetera, are in place in a number of provider models. And that's something that we would like to see augmented and scaled up so that additional providers could do similar things.
Thank you, Jeff. Ms. Boutin, ensuite, 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. We talked about social housing, and you did say that you would like to you would like to see $1.7 billion retained in the system, the money that has already been invested, and you're not the only person that's taken this position. I see people in the room who would also like to see this money kept in the social system. I would say that this is a position of all cities. I'd like to talk about affordable housing. We've talked about social housing. Let's talk now about affordable housing. I think that I probably saw statistics last week saying that homeless rates among young people increased by 50% in the past 10 years. And we know that in the recent past, the vacancy rate has increased, and it's about 3% in most cities. This is something good, but it doesn't mean that it's the right type of housing. Single persons or large families, for example, may have difficulty finding housing. Housing, of course, is a basis for many other things such as health and so forth. If we are looking at the housing situation and we are taking into account economic and social objectives and we wish to eradicate poverty, do you think a national housing strategy would be useful? Yes, definitely.
In its investment or in its budgetary plan coming out in a few weeks is going to be looking at a short-term investment plan primarily focused on stimulus programs, shovel-worthy projects, possibly green, et cetera. However, in addition to that, it is absolutely fundamental that we look at this from a longer-term perspective to address a number of the issues that you just raised. It's why in one of the principles I mentioned in my opening remarks that we feel the strong need to create a forum, a table, whereby we can bring together a large range of stakeholders the federal government, provincial governments, municipalities, providers, Aboriginal groups, etc., to really define the policy framework for a long-term national housing strategy in Canada. We've talked this afternoon about a number of options in terms of how funding could go, how that could be sliced up among a number of different possibilities. But we need to essentially sit down with the range of stakeholders to say, okay, 10 years out, what does that policy framework look like? What are the investment targets? What is the accountability? What are the measures of whether that program has been successful? As an organization, CHRA is making ourselves available to act as a convener, a forum, to create that space. We'll be soon in talks with CMHC to see if we can essentially operationalize that. We're hoping, frankly, for the support of this committee to support that concept so that we can really flesh out in a collaborative fashion what a long-term housing strategy would look like.
Thank you. We have a little time left, and it'll be a little bit out of order, but I know Mr. Abutev and Mr. Champagne, the parliamentary secretary, have sat through most of these meetings and never get a question. So if we could split our time, Mr. Abutev, go ahead for a couple of minutes, and then Mr. Champagne.
Well, thank you. I'll have a very short question, basically, to Monsieur Lavoie or Mr. Lavoie. I'm always been curious about the productivity level among Canadian manufacturers, at least in comparison to the rest of the industrial world. Knowing that when your dollar is up, you upgrade your manufacturing facilities and equipment, and then when your dollar is down, that you're ready to go start exporting and creating jobs. Is this happening in Canada? And can you please brief us on the productivity level in Canada? If you can be precise, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah. So first of all, what the relationship I make with investment in capacity, it's not necessarily the value of the dollar, it's cash flow. If you have more cash flow, usually you drive more investment. Yes, it's true, a lot of equipment is imported, but at the same time, if you have cash flow, you're not going to be able to buy much, right? But there's an effect, but it's not entirely the only effect. Productivity, you're right. Right now, we produce, for 1 hour worked in Canada, we produce for $44 worth of goods. If you compare it to companies like Germany, France, USA, you're all above $58 per hour. So, you know, yeah, it's about quality of life, but really what it's about, it means if this is worth $44, I take an hour to produce it. And if I go to compete against Germans in Germany, they can make 1.5 in the same hour. So multiply that by millions. It means I'm not competitive. So it's one thing to go and sign free trade agreements with all these countries, but it's like going to war with a small gun, right? If you're not as competitive as they are, they can produce more in less time. Why? Is it because Germany has a weak dollar? They don't. It's because they've invested heavily in equipment, in automation, and they also invest heavily in skills. They don't let people, you know, drop off school and stuff like that. They actually put them in something tangible they can do.
Thank you, Mr. Champagne.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll do something different. I'll start with Ms. Ballantyne. Listen, I must say the minister and I went across the country to listen to a number of groups, and childcare was something we heard a lot about, how we can bring underrepresented class in our communities into the workforce, and obviously women with young children. We look at the Quebec model and how could foster bringing more women with young children in the workforce. I must say, quite aware of this issue because I've heard it in many of the consultations. So I just want to take note of that your issue is very much something we've heard about in other things. Je voulais juste parler à M. Beau la même chose. On a été...
I wanted to say, Mr. Bro, that we were quite proud to have people from the cultural communities and entertainment communities. I think that you contribute to the vitality of our communities, and it's also important for creativity. We heard lots of people during our consultations.
To Mr. Bain, what are the best practices in leveraging private capital in PPP project, and not just in Canada, but I've been involved in my previous life in a number in Asia and other places. Share with the committee what are best practices in leveraging private capital in trying to invest in PPP. As you know, we've been looking at different funds that could participate and leverage what we need to do in Canada. I think Canada is a great place to invest, and I know a number of players around the world, not just Canada, let's think big a bit, would like to come in Canada and invest. Tell me some of the best practices you've seen around the world.
So, I mean, best practices in the leading jurisdictions, which I say have been the UK, Australia, continental Europe, seem to coalesce around finding the appropriate role for private capital. So that is the appropriately structured transaction that gives a long-term predictable cash flow adjusted for risk. So making sure private capital doesn't just get a free ride, but actually takes appropriate risk. And for the incremental cost of private capital, ensuring that they bear risk so that the overall cost of the private sector, the net present value of the transaction, is superior to government doing things alone. So it is making sure there is aware, interested, invested skin in the game. In terms of figuring out how that works, in Canada, our transactions tend to be highly levered, so they're minimal risk after the construction period, so 90% debt, 10% equity. In other jurisdictions, we find private capital absorbing volume risk on toll roads, for example. That has not been a feature of the Canadian market.
Thank you. No, we're out of time. Sorry, Francois. With that, we'll have to end this session and bring forward our next witnesses. I want to thank you all for providing information fairly forthright to the committee. Thank you. We'll suspend for about 3 minutes and reconvene.
Vous avez
Could we come to order again, please? Okay. Okay. Okay, I think we're all settled in. There's lots of space, Judy, up at the table if you want to sit up there with the rest of the MPs. Okay, we'll start our second round of discussions this afternoon on pre-budget consultations for the budget 2016. And our first witness, and I will limit the points being made fairly strictly to 5 minutes. First up will be the Canada Building Trade Unions, Mr. Smiley. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Good evening. It seems like good evening already, members of the committee. You've been at this a while, so congratulations. Canada's Building Trades Unions represents 500,000 members across Canada. Together with our colleagues in the building trades in the United States, close to 3 million members in North America. We represent people who go to work every day to build roads, the rails, energy infrastructure, commercial and office buildings, and the homes where people live in Canada. We are the largest private trainer in Canada. We invest more than $250 million every year in training, in apprenticeship programs, classroom training programs, most importantly, on-the-job training. We know jobs. We're paid by our members to find them jobs every week. If the building trades doesn't find them a job, we haven't done ours. Almost all skilled trades workers will at some point in their career travel long distances for work. More than half travel on a regular basis to where the work is. Jobs are primarily the purview of the private sector, but there is a distinct and valuable role for the federal government. I submit today that the federal government can and should support mobility measures in the Canadian labour market. Simple, cost-effective steps that would assist people who could not or would not otherwise go to where the work is, moving skilled trades workers from areas of high unemployment to where employers need them and when they need them. Relatively minor adjustments to the tax code or a restructure of the employment insurance benefits system. They would both be inexpensive compared to other government spending on the table today. A mobility assistance measure would ease unemployment in some hard-hit regions by getting qualified, hard-working Canadians to labour markets where their talents are required by employers. Even short-term jobs, especially in construction, help the economy and help the country. A mobility measure could encourage people to transition from employment insurance and start working again. A mobility system would help link Canada's numerous regional economies, a bridge from one community to another, even if that community is thousands of kilometers away. All construction work is temporary. All construction work is transitory. Skilled tradespeople are dispatched wherever the work may be. The lucky ones get travel assistance from either the construction employer or a large asset owner like Syncrude Canada. The existing permanent relocation tax credit in the Income Tax Act doesn't make sense for a permanently temporary workforce or apply to workers our country needs to move the most. These workers are not interested nor should be expected to move their families, and we shouldn't want them to uproot and move their homes for a temporary 6-week or even a 6-month job. Canada needs a change in incentive policy for in-demand occupations when relocating for temporary work. For many years, workers have been flocking to Alberta. Now, many unemployed Albertans will be seeking work elsewhere in Canada. Voices across industry are united on this file. The Canadian Construction Association, the Progressive Contractors Association, and a host of other employer groups join us in this call. Getting a job is a non-partisan issue. The Government of Canada introducing a mobility assistance policy for in-demand or unemployed workers is not a partisan act. The government helping people temporarily relocate for work is not a partisan exercise. The government's expense getting them there today means tax revenues tomorrow from the worker and the capital asset they're building and the company doing the work. The pilot we suggest in our submission starts small, $4 million in foregone tax revenue if changes are made to the ITA. It returns $12 million in income tax paid by individuals alone. Pick a few occupations most in need and choose a few major projects to determine eligibility for a pilot. Federal budgets are about wise spending choices, and this modest pilot certainly falls into the frugal category when you look at the breadth and depth of some of the spending being proposed today. Changes in the EI system would actually be revenue neutral to the government, giving someone the benefit they were eligible for up front rather than over time for travel purposes is free to the Government of Canada. Contributions to EI were made by employers and employees. This measure could also help Canadians get the training they need in a different regional economy by using the job grant. The job grant is dependent on an employer willing to hire you. Markets with hot employment markets will require more people to be trained. There's a natural link here. The Canada Job Grant, despite the noise over the last couple of years, is the single most important change to the training system in Canada in the last 2 decades. So what next? I'm concluding. It's up to you, the Finance Committee and the Minister of Finance, to help a critical industry and help in-demand workers. In previous reports, HUMA, FINA, they've all recommended we take a look at mobility measures for skilled trades workers. It doesn't seem like a better time to take action than today. What matters to us is having an available workforce wherever needed for Canada's economy. What matters to us is being able to build those infrastructure projects we're talking about today. We want to have labor market stability and certainty in the marketplace for the bidders of all large projects. Just incidentally, in the United States, Canada's skilled trades workers are inherently less likely than American workers to travel temporarily for work. Funny enough, the IRS allows deductions for travel to obtain temporary work. Here's an opportunity to make Canada's workforce more productive and reduce taxes for Canadians everywhere. I remain available to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smiley. Mr. Reagan with the Canada's Eco-Fiscal Commission. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Reagan. I'm a professor of economics at McGill, but I'm here today as the chair of the Eco-Fiscal Commission, which is a 5 or 6 year project designed to help Canadian governments across the country think about how we can improve environmental and economic outcomes at the same time. I come before you with an unusual budget ask. I will ask for no spending, and I will ask for no baubles added to or taken from the tax system. My basic ask is to encourage the Government of Canada to slow down in its thinking about climate policy and to make sure to get the details right. So I'll make 4 quick points in my 5 minutes. The first will be the most brief, is simply the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There are many costs associated with greenhouse gas emissions that Canadians feel across the country, whether it is the decline in the economic value of the western forests from the pine beetle, or whether it's the decline in the economic value of the mollusk industry in Atlantic Canada, and many things in between. And while it is true that Canada represents only about 1.6% of global emissions, and this is certainly a global problem, I think Canadians probably would like to be 1.6% of the solution. The second thing is the importance of achieving emissions reductions in the most cost-effective way possible. And this is really a central point. It is not, we are, after all, in the Eco-Fiscal Commission, first and foremost, we are economists. So we are looking not just at the need to improve the environment, but the need to actually maintain a prosperous economy as well. And when talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the most cost-effective way, carbon pricing comes to mind. Our report back from April of 2015 showed, with a great deal of modeling province by province in this country, that there is a substantial economic benefit from using carbon pricing rather than using regulatory approaches for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it's very important that the government take seriously the impact of carbon pricing on the competitiveness of firms and on the overall impact on GDP growth. But those things need not be obstacles to a well-designed policy. My third point is the importance of respecting provincial jurisdictions. Number one, the environment is a shared jurisdiction between the federal government and provincial governments, but resources and energy are, for the most part, exclusive provincial jurisdictions. So I think it's very important to avoid federal-provincial tensions in this country, that the federal government respect provincial action and provincial jurisdiction. And the second part of that is that when any government starts pricing carbon emissions, there will invariably be revenue generated. And there is a serious, I think, political and an economic complication associated with any revenues that are generated within a province and taken back to the centre, which I'll call Ottawa, even though the geographic centre is much closer to Kenora. So I think if the federal government gets into the game of pricing carbon, I think you've got to think very carefully about how to guarantee that those revenues remain in the provinces from which they are generated. And the fourth point I would make is the importance of getting the details right. So I've mentioned a couple of details, but there are many other details. The fact that Quebec currently has a cap-and-trade system that is linked to California's, and that Ontario will soon be joining that. The presence of California in the cap-and-trade system between Ontario and Quebec imposes a very interesting constraint on Canadian policy. The idea that the federal government may, as was reported today in the Globe and Mail, may explore the idea of putting on a minimum price, but then thinking about how that minimum price interacts with the existing provincial prices. There are many, many details. And this is a big file. It's a big issue. I think it is very important that the federal government participate in a very collegial way with the provinces to develop this policy, but I encourage nobody to rush. This is not an argument to delay. This is an argument to get the details right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Turning to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Mr. Wooldrick.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Je vous remercie de m'avoir invité.
I'd like to thank you for your invitation this evening. I am the Federal Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and for those who are not familiar with our association, we are a group of citizens incorporated under a federal act, a non-profit organization with over 429,000 members. We reduce taxes and waste and have a responsible government.
News for the committee, much like Professor Reagan. Unlike the vast majority of witnesses you will hear from, I am not going to ask you to spend any money. On the contrary, I'm going to suggest that the best way forward is instead for the government to show restraint. Our pre-budget brief, an expanded version of which is also available on our Federation's website, makes 10 recommendations. Some of those, such as balancing the budget and paying down the public debt, it is fair to say we do not see eye to eye with the government on. And we will, of course, continue to advocate regularly on those issues in the public sphere. But given the time constraints today, I wanted to instead focus on a few recommendations which I think there may be a chance for broader agreement, or at least a better opportunity for productive dialogue. First is a little discussed issue of the political party donation tax credit. I think we can all agree that donations to political parties are an act of civic engagement and should be encouraged. But is it really fair that a donation of $200 to the Liberal Party or Conservative Party should give the donor a $150 tax credit, whereas that same $200 donation to the Canadian Cancer Society or Red Cross only results in a $30 tax credit? Is it really fair for political parties to have such a big advantage over the many worthy charitable causes also competing for voluntary donations? We do not think so, which is why we recommend the political party donation tax credit be reduced to match the same level that charities receive in order to create a more level playing field. Second, We recommend the government resist the temptation to implement any of these so-called sugar or fat taxes. The good intentions of those advocating for such taxes is not in question, but the effectiveness of these taxes in meeting their policy objective of improving public health is on much shakier ground. We strongly encourage the government to take a long, hard look at some of the unintended and detrimental consequences of such taxes based on the empirical evidence in other jurisdictions before attempting any similar measures here in Canada. Third, implementing a truth in budgeting law. Simply put, knowing the cost of promises is an essential part of making informed decisions about their desirability. This is already accepted as a given when it comes to political party platforms during an election, which are always professionally costed. It is time to extend this principle further to include any new proposed legislation in Parliament. Governing is in large part about making choices between competing alternatives, and we cannot gloss over the fact that these choices have costs attached to them. Fourth, a core review of government spending to identify at least the least efficient or wasteful 5% of all program expenditures. The empirical fact is that since 2006, federal program spending has ballooned by 23%, or nearly $50 billion, which far outstrips inflation and population growth. Canadians expect that this money is being spent efficiently and effectively on the programs and services they need and want, and if not, they should be reallocated to areas of higher priority or returned to them in form of tax relief. Finally, controlling public sector pay and spending. There is a natural tension between the interests of public sector unions and the interests of Canadian taxpayers at large. The former group wants to get the best deal for its members. The latter group is the one paying for it and needs confidence they are getting value for their money. Public sector workers deserve fair treatment, but fair doesn't mean the government should always be overly generous. It is important that the government should be as hard-nosed an advocate for taxpayers at the bargaining table as union leaders are for their own membership. In closing, our basic message to the government is quite straightforward. Please tread carefully. It is natural to be ambitious to help Canadians facing difficult times, but you cannot fix every problem or grant every request for spending. Temper your faith in the power of government to do good with a sober understanding of the limits of that power. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning to the Canadian Credit Union Association, Ms. Durden.
Thank you. Merci. Bonsoir, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to present the point of view of credit union cooperatives so that the committee will take our views into account.
Some of you may not yet be familiar with the recent change in the credit union system. Last month, the Canadian Credit Union Association, which I represent, replaced Credit Union Central of Canada as the new national voice for credit unions and Caisse Populaire outside of Quebec. The transformation has been part of a collaborative process over a number of years to build a national association and a national voice for the 316 credit unions in Canada. More than 5.6 million Canadians, or 1 in 5 outside of Quebec, trust a local credit union for their day-to-day banking activities. Collectively, credit unions employ more than 27,000 Canadians and are the only financial institution in more than 380 communities. They are important pillars of the economy, managing over $186 billion in assets, 7% of the mortgage lending in the market outside of Quebec, 11% of the small business market, 11% of lending to the agricultural sector, and that's higher in some of the western provinces. What's more, our members continue to rank the highest in surveys about service to small businesses. With the right policy frameworks, credit unions can partner with the public and private sectors to provide investment that will create sustainable growth and economic opportunity. Our 3 recommendations for the budget to help build those frameworks, I'll go through them individually. First, implementing or enhancing the federal loan guarantee programs to support credit union lending. Credit unions believe the federal loan loss guarantees that can be a cost-effective approach to provide lending to underserved individuals and priority sectors of the economy. We believe this because we're proud to have demonstrated the success in guaranteed-based programs. The Foreign Credential Recognition Pilot Program is one example. 36% of new Canadians encounter financial barriers to getting their foreign credentials recognized. Yet through this program, the federal government, community organizations, and credit unions are helping foreign-trained individuals cover the cost of the credentialing process. And as of March 2015, 5 credit unions have made more than 333 loans backed by the government to skilled new Canadians to help them pursue training to work in their professions when they're in Canada. As a result of this pilot program, 110 loan recipients completed their certification trainings and are working in their field or a related field. We recommend the federal government expand this program and make it permanent in Budget 2016. Similarly, because of our local roots, credit unions have experienced supporting social and community infrastructure projects and have a solid relationship with the municipalities and community agencies. We recommend the government's proposed infrastructure bank include loan guarantees to allow credit unions to help deliver vital social infrastructure projects. Deuxièmement, le budget 2014 annonçait des mesures transitoires pour accompagner.
Secondly, the 2014 budget announced transitional measures that would accompany credit unions that wish to migrate from a provincial regulatory regime to a federal one.
Deposit insurance guarantees, transitional funding support, and extended insurance retailing powers to assist credit unions interested in doing so to move from the provincial sphere to the national sphere. We recommend that the federal government clarify in the budget the parameters around this proposed transitional measures for federal credit unions. Clarity will further define the legislative framework established in 2012 and promote the government's objective of enhancing domestic competition in the banking and financial services sector. And finally, implementing a new tax measure to help credit unions build capital. Like chartered banks, credit unions are required to hold large amounts of capital, but unlike chartered banks, credit unions rely primarily on retained earnings to meet these requirements. To help credit unions grow their retained earnings and ensure the competitive balance in the tax system, we recommend that the federal government implement a new capital growth tax credit for credit unions. This tax measure would help credit unions lend to middle-class Canadians, create local jobs in rural and urban areas, while meeting increased regulatory capital requirements. Our estimate on this measure would result in $34 million in foregone tax revenue, but that would generate an additional $418 million in lending to small business, farmers, and to families. Parliament put in place a similar measure more than 40 years ago. It was good government policy and helped to support credit union capital growth, mirroring the positive impact the capital gains tax deduction has on building bank capital, while respecting their financial cooperatives build capital, differently. This measure is set to expire in 2017 and should be replaced by our proposal. So to conclude, Mr. Chair, the Canadian Credit Union Association thanks the committee the opportunity to participate in the consultation and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And turning to Ms. Lantier with the Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities of Canada. The floor is yours.
Bonsoir, Monsieur le Président.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sylviane Lantier. I am the president of the Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities of Canada, and I'd like to thank you for inviting us to appear before your committee today. In 9 provinces and 3 territories, 2.6 million citizens have chosen French. The fact that we can truly speak about linguistic duality is because we have Francophone communities that are dynamic and diversified in all the regions of the country. They incarnate one of our basic Canadian values. We are here today as spokespersons for these communities and people who are determined to live in French. The Federation is here speaking on behalf of 42 organizations and institutions throughout Canada devoted to the development of our communities, including the 12 Francophone provincial and territorial associations. As a leader of this vast collaborative network, the Federation is the federal government's principal interlocutor when it comes to official languages and providing support to Francophone communities in a minority situation. The Federation speaks for hundreds of local organizations, cultural and community centers, health networks, as well as settlement services in French. The reason why I've been providing you with this long introduction is I want you to understand the specific way in which we have provided ourselves with services and places where we are able to live in French. The fact that such services and places exist is because organizations and community institutions have joined together to overcome isolation and to work together for the well-being of everyone. The first piece of good news that we have to share with you is that there have never been so many people who wish to live their lives in French in Canada, and the demand for activities in this language is constantly on the rise. The second piece of good news is that this huge organization, this huge network of organizations and institutions is still looking for innovative solutions to provide better services to French-speaking citizens. Vocation as builders is part of our DNA, because in a minority setting, we have taken on the responsibility for developing the infrastructures we need to live in French. The added value of our communities and cultural centers, our schools, our settlement services, our community media, and Francophone organizations is well recognized. But today, these institutions have reached the limit of what they're able to do with the resources at their disposal. Many of them receive funding from Canadian Heritage through the Official Languages Support Program. But such funding has not increased, nor have the funds been indexed for the past 11 years. Considering the increased cost of living, this represents a 30 to 35% drop in the resource level of such organizations. The situation is such that in certain places, such as the Northwest Territories, organizations have had to shut down because of a lack of funding, whereas very often they were the only ones to provide services in French. Other more specialized organizations have experienced different realities, but just as concerning. The Roadmap for Official Languages 2013-2018 did provide for envelopes for targeted initiatives, but some of the funding has not yet been made available. Strengthening the capacity of our communities is essential if we want them to remain champions for promoting French, as is the case now. Our infrastructures must be able to be modernized and improved in order to meet increased growth. Our media must adapt to the digital shift. Our organizations and institutions must be able to meet emerging needs, for example, when it comes to Francophone immigration. We know that you'll be hearing from many groups. They have many priorities and high expectations. In view of the fact that the federal budget for 2016 will be the first one of this government, we would like to see it, first of all, to send out a clear signal demonstrating that it intends to act to provide support to those who create and animate French-speaking Canada. We therefore recommend that the federal government include a declaration that the federal government intends at the very least to index funds that invest in Francophone community institutions and organizations for the fiscal year 2017-18. That the Government of Canada make available as of 2016-17 the funding that under the Roadmap initiative that has not yet been made available. And the government commit to work with organizations and institutions of our community as special partners to identify the needs and possible solutions, allowing us to strengthen capacities and infrastructure in our community. On the eve of the celebrations for the 150th anniversary of Confederation, the government has an opportunity to take significant and historic action to strengthen Canadian linguistic duality. It can do so by providing support to those who create a French-speaking environment throughout Canada. Thank you.
Municipalities, Mr. Louis, the President. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Easter, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to come and present to you today. My name is Raymond Louis. I'm the President of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I'm the acting mayor for the City of Vancouver, and been elected like you for 5 terms, not all of you 5 terms, but certainly I understand the work before you, and having served 6 years as chair of the Finance Committee in the City of Vancouver. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to discuss what is potentially a transformative federal budget for Canada, and give you a few thoughts of what FCM is thinking. What stands before us as elected officials is an opportunity to redefine how Canada works. It's an opportunity to work together to ensure that Canada's world-class cities are more livable, that they are competitive, and that our rural and northern communities also thrive. As president of the FCM, I can tell you that Canada's local governments is ready to rise to the moment. Mayors and municipal leaders have long understood that solutions to the country's biggest national challenges can be found right here in our neighborhoods where people live and call home. That's why we welcome the government's $60 billion pledge for transit, social, and green infrastructure. We know that these kinds of smart investment pay dividends for our economy and for our communities. Transit maintenance and new construction increase productivity while reducing the smog and gridlock that plagues our cities. Social infrastructure like affordable housing is the cornerstone to ensuring livable neighborhoods and a better quality of life for Canadians. Green infrastructure investments like home energy retrofits create jobs, grow the economy, and help tackle climate change. The FCM's 2016 budget submission is a blueprint for you to turn this bold vision into meaningful action, and you'll see that we've distributed it to all of you. Hopefully you'll have a chance to review it and during the time of my speech and further on as well. It lays out a comprehensive path to create jobs, spark sustainable growth, and provide a better quality of life for all Canadians. Our budget submission focuses on priorities that matter most to Canadians in their daily lives. Not only that, it directs the distinct local realities of Canadians' diverse communities and the realities that mean the difference between a well-intentioned policy and an effective policy. And to do that, the FCM and the municipal sector call on the federal government to streamline and improve the transparency of existing application-based infrastructure programs. The fact is, there's no shortage of worthy green infrastructure, social infrastructure, and transit projects ready to transform our communities. What we need is the right partner and the right environment. That means increasing the federal contribution to infrastructure projects and expanding and dedicating investments in Canada's rural communities. It means ensuring municipalities have the flexibility to make local, evidence-based decisions that are best positioned to make. It means ensuring both short-term repair and renewal investments that can create jobs immediately and long-term strategic investments that lay the foundation for Canada's future. These are just some of the policy options put forward by the FCM's nearly 2,000 members and the 32 million Canadians that the FCM represents. Our budget submission touches on everything from building reliable public transit to affordable housing, creating more vibrant communities, and a more sustainable future. Municipal leaders envision a thriving Canada of sustainable, livable communities with good jobs, exceptional transit, housing choices, and innovative responses to climate change. But most importantly, Canadians envision it too. It's what they voted for last fall. To get there, municipality needs the tools and the flexibility to do what we do best, find solutions and deliver results. All orders of government have to work together in full partnership. So together, let's rise to the moment. Let's show Canadians that their leaders are transforming bold ideas into real jobs, growth, and more livable communities for all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Louie, and thank you all for your presentations. Turning to the first round of questions, 7 minutes each. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My first question goes to Mr. Louie. It's probably no surprise. I was on council for 10 years in my region, so this is where the the witness I've been looking for. One of the biggest reasons why I ran, in fact, was a frustration not with necessarily the funding, but how funding flows to municipalities. And I've met with, during my pre-budget consultations with Chairman Roger Anderson, who I know is on the executive, so I'm sure you know well. And one of the issues, or biggest issues, is how it flows. And over the last couple of days, we heard from witnesses who talked about not shovel-worthy projects. And my frustration has been that I know from municipalities we could have these more visionary projects ready, but it's the cost to get them ready for tender that makes them usually ineligible for the former funding model. So can you speak to, does FCM have a position in terms of their preferred flow of these infrastructure money, what municipalities would prefer to ensure that we can actually have shovel-ready projects that are the more visionary transit, climate change type infrastructure ready to go?
Okay, thank you for the question. Clearly, the FCM and our members agree with the government's position that it needs to be both shovel-ready but shovel-worthy, that smart investments is the underpinning of our submission to the government today, that we think investments today will save money tomorrow because infrastructure that is in need of repair costs much more, potentially $10 to 1 if we wait too long. The delivery model has been a challenge for us for a number of years, and we've made this submission to previous government as well, that an allocation-based model, similar to gas tax, is the preferred model for local government. That application-based models where it's a lottery, where we don't have the assurity that we will receive a steady stream of funding in order to properly plan for infrastructure, is impossible for it to be an efficient program. That without the clarity of receiving that money, we cannot go through our 3, 5, 10-year infrastructure planning processes at the local government level. And as an order of government, it is important for us to have that assurity, both not just to receive it from the federal government, but also to lever the provincial and territorial governments as well, ensuring that we have a complete picture and a collaboration between all the orders of government and private sector in order to have those projects delivered in a timely fashion when they're needed, not based on a program that might become available at any point in time. And it's a cattle call, essentially, for everyone rushing to try to attract that federal funding, and in turn, perhaps not having the best timing of that project being brought forward.
Thank you so much. You summarized it really well, and it certainly helps me when I'm advocating given that background. My next question is just in regards to some of the social infrastructure housing, and we heard in the panel before. I don't know how it is for you and your municipality, but in Ontario, I think we're the only province where the province doesn't fund social housing. So does FCM have a position, or again, it's about the flow of how these monies fund, because if the federal government provides funding for social housing, Ontario will get less in the sense that, yes, we're all one taxpayer, but we'd be getting less in the sense that we don't have anything from the provincial government. It's the regional municipality, which was with my background. So does FCM, have you looked at how each province will have some differences and how we then make up for it so everyone gets their relatively fair share? And I'm like Vancouver, but in Toronto and the GTA, the housing need is enormous. So how do we ensure that we can get as much with the same money being distributed?
What I can say is that our membership has been clear, and it is one of our top priorities. There's 3 priorities of the FCM: housing, transit, and green infrastructure. Housing housing affordability is a challenge for all of our local government members, every single one. And what we've put forward as part of our submission is that we are asking, out of the, I think, $1.9 billion allocation over the first 2 years, 1.3 of it being put towards repair and state of good repair for existing infrastructure, while providing some flexibility for new projects to come forward to build new housing units as well. Maintaining the CMHC funding that is currently in place, that ensuring that these revenues or these streams of funding aren't lost to other services when we know that our population is aging and that the need will grow over time. So these are two major pieces that we're asking for. But the underpinning of that is that we need to have the flexibility to apply it with a local lens. So the experience in Ontario, which is different than certainly in Vancouver, where we have the poorest postal code in Canada, and we have thousands of units that are necessary. Local governments, in my instance in Vancouver, are willing to put $250 million worth of land available and submit that as part of a package to the federal government and our provincial government, hoping to lever some solution to this very, very challenging problem.
Thank you very much. And I have one other question for you, but if we can just keep the response, if you have a response, because I do want to ask one other question to another panelist, but...
Time for about one, Jennifer.
Okay, then I'll connect with you offline in that question. I wanted to ask Mr. Smiley in regards to the building trades. In Ontario again, and I'm not sure if it's a problem elsewhere, but we have issues, and I've toured some of our top apprentice or our building trade, or sorry, trades facilities, and they have amazing training, but the problem is once the members are trained, they don't have apprenticeship spots. So is there something is this a nationwide problem? Is it in specific areas? And how do we address it? And kind of in addition to that, how do we also encourage more women and First Nations into the building trade sector?
Thank you for the question. I'll answer the last one first. To get more First Nations and women into the trades, employers have to want to do it. So we have to work together with them to change the culture and the hiring practices in the economy. And we have programs that we work on with employers. Your first question, getting more young people involved in apprenticeships is key to what we do. The facilities that we have across Ontario and the country, we have a system where we try and bring in as much capacity as we can in terms of attracting new people. We're limited by facility size, and we're limited by capacity to place those apprentices with employers, but we're always pushing them to put more out in the field so that we can take them in. One of the best things we do with employers is we have joint training committees across the country where we forecast and plan to try and maximize the number of apprentices that we put to the field each year.
Thank you both. Mr. Leipert.
Mr. Smiley, as a Calgary MP, I assume that you would guess that I'm interested in exploring a lot more your mobility assistance proposals. And as a Conservative MP, I'm especially interested to hear proposals that say if you give a tax cut, the return is significantly larger rather than simply coming in and asking for money. So I appreciate that. I would like to know a little bit more about, explain a little bit more about your mobility assistance measures, because, so if I understand it right, let's take a hypothetical situation as we move into 2016 where you've got a demand in Toronto, yes, sir, and you've got an excess in Alberta, and you have a union hall in Toronto that needs 100 electricians. You have the source in Alberta. The problem is they can't get there.
Yes, sir.
So expand a little bit on that.
So they have to get, the problem is not that they can't get there.
No, they can't afford to get there.
The problem is that it's on the person to cover their travel expenses before they become employees in Toronto. And so sometimes employers cover travel costs or a portion of travel costs. In my two proposals, you can do it one of two ways. You can have, say someone spends $2,000 in travel, you could have a portion of that money returned to them at the end of the year on their tax return, or instead of getting 6 weeks of EI, you're only eligible for 3, but you get your last 2 weeks first, so that person can get on the WestJet flight and fly to Toronto. And then once they're there and working, obviously they're contributing back to the working world and paying taxes. It's a stopgap measure, right? It's a hiccup, right? We just need to fix the hiccup and get them there.
Because I think the difference what used to happen in Alberta, and many of the MPs are aware because they had constituents on a fly-in, fly-out basis.
Yep.
And the $100 a barrel oil paid for that. The problem is, in this particular case, if there is not a tax break, it's just going to be built on to the cost of the infrastructure project, which is going to come out of federal government money anyway. So it might as well come from the tax system, and I think return significant value. So I think that's something you should push hard on, and I would encourage my colleagues across the way who have a lot more input into the budget than we do on this side. That I'd like to see that kind of a tax break, which has great returns, looked at significantly. I'd like to just ask a quick question of Ms. Durden and the credit union. I'd like a little more, along the same lines, a little more explanation on your point 3, because I don't quite understand what the current situation is and what's going to happen as this expires, and then elaborate a little bit more. Give me a on-the-ground example of a benefit of what you're proposing.
For the
what is it you call it? Capital growth tax credit.
So unlike banks, credit unions lend out capital. They raise their capital through retained earnings.
Mm-hmm.
Banks raise capitals through the public markets.
Right.
They lend it when they need money. They go to the markets. They raise capital, and so there's two things at play here. The credit unions, as this in all financial institutions that are regulated in Canada, need to raise more capital in order to meet higher regulatory standards. So we need to maintain larger amounts of capital, and we need to, and we're trying to lend it out. So credit unions often run up against their capital requirements and are unable to lend out as much as they would like to members or customers because they hit their capital levels. So at a credit on 5% of their growth would allow them to both retain more capital, get a tax credit for it, and meet the regulatory requirements, and incent them to grow more capital, credit for it, lend out more. So our numbers, our research shows that on average, credit unions lend out 12 times. For every dollar they lend out 12 times. For every dollar of capital they retain, they lend $12. So the multiplier effect is times 12 in terms of.
I still got a little time. So just so I understand, then the net benefit of that is simply more dollars to lend, not necessarily a benefit to the consumer.
Well, if they're not able to lend because they're running up against their capital requirements, then it's the consumers that are
there's no money to lend.
There's no money to lend to them.
And this would be especially important in rural areas?
Credit unions are in some areas like Alberta or Manitoba, Saskatchewan, half of the lending to small business is from credit unions. So they're very important lenders to the mid-market, the smaller market, across Canada, but particularly where they're stronger in the western provinces. So it would make more money available to be lent for mortgages, for small businesses, for families, that kind of thing, which is the market in which credit unions primarily operate.
Thank you.
You get time for a very quick one?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Before I turn to Ms. Benson, on the point on labor mobility, just to give you an example how important the oil and the potash industry is to Atlantic Canada. When I would fly to Ottawa on a plane that has 48 seats, there would be at least 8 to 10 people on that plane heading to Saskatchewan or Alberta. Several direct flights several times a week out of Moncton, New Brunswick to Fort McMurray and elsewhere in the west. And they'd work many different patterns, 2 weeks in, 1 week out, 3 weeks in, 1 week out. And that pattern now hasn't ceased, but completely. There is still some.
Chairman, it will cease in 2016 because all of the construction in the oil sands is going to more or less end in 2016.
But it tells you the extent of the labor mobility coming from other areas of the country, and you're right, the oil industry was paying for a lot of it. Yeah.
Something on that, Mr. Chairman. The one thing that was a bit of a misunderstood fact was that when we had labor mobility coming into Alberta from all parts of Canada, we weren't faced with the infrastructure needs because people were moving to Alberta. So, and the families stayed in their hometowns, the kids went to the schools that they went to, and the local municipalities weren't faced with building schools and all the other things. So it works, it could work in the case of Toronto. They don't necessarily need to have that added infrastructure, but they'd have the workforce.
Thank you. I think an interesting discussion. Turning to Ms. Benson, welcome to the Finance Committee. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. Raymond, I'd like you to sort of maybe talk a little bit about, in sort of previous consultations, the mayors had talked about the need for funding different things like sporting and recreational and cultural infrastructure, and sort of needing to kind of expand the list of eligible projects to be sort of included. And I know you didn't get a chance to sort of cover all the topics in your piece, so I'm going to give you a chance just to say a bit more about how municipalities and of course ultimately citizens gain from kind of expanding the projects that are eligible, which I think is sort of what you're talking about, having a local lens on what makes sense to municipalities.
Yes,
so.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, the proposal that you have before you, perhaps if you would like to follow along, I think that is on page 5, where it outlines the addition under the right-hand side of the page. Just rising to the moment is the top of the headline there. And what we're asking for is additional flexibility, that in certain circumstances, our infrastructure is in dire need of investment. And it is an investment. It is not just raising taxes or pushing money out the door, but it's an investment for needed infrastructure across Canada. In some instances, municipalities have done a better job than others, and we recognize that they've done the proper investment, but they need other investments like sporting facilities, like art centers and cultural centers, and they should have that opportunity to attract some level of funding. That's where, if it's an allocation model that we're advocating for, it provides for an opportunity to improve the quality of life of Canadians. Because after all, that's what we're elected to do, is to improve the quality of life of Canadians in whatever means possible, making sure that it's efficient, of course, and making sure that there's a foundation for us as a nation to be more effective and moving forward, having an economy that works for all of us as well, jobs, for instance. So what we're saying is an expansion of the framework is important to recognize that there is a diversity of need across the country. When you go up north, the need will be significantly different than it is in urban centres. Rural Canada has a whole host of issues that are different and just as important, despite not being the same as what it would be in an urban centre.
Thank you. And I just want to add further to your comment about a model that has predictable funding with a formula so that municipalities can plan what they want to do, when it makes sense, and what are the priorities. So that's something I think is very, very important, so that smaller places can understand when and where they're going to get the money and how they can plan for it. Chris, I just have maybe a quick question for you, just to sort of talk about, you sort of offered kind of two different models that you're looking at, and this is kind of your opportunity to maybe help us think about which one might be better or different, or in what way.
Sure.
And so I guess I'm interested in, particularly in my province, around apprenticeship, and whether one mobility piece might be more helpful to those who are still in apprenticeship as opposed to being journey persons already.
Okay, so in our submission, the system which revolves around employment insurance doesn't touch as many people as the other model that I suggest. And so if we want to hit the maximum number of apprentices and the maximum number of folks, I mean, my submission would be we go the route of some sort of tweak to the Income Tax Act based on occupation. If we're solely using this as a way to move people off unemployment into the workforce, that might disadvantage some folks who are, just switching jobs, say a job in Saskatoon building a waterworks facility to a job in Toronto helping out with the Spadina line. And so it depends what the public policy purpose is. So if we're going to just help folks who are unemployed move to where the work is, perhaps the EI regs are the way to go. But if we want to do something sort of on it with more purpose, with longer lasting implications, we could do something around the ITA, the Income Tax Act, based on occupation. But we could try it, right? We'd have a pilot both ways or either way and see what happens. I wouldn't want apprentices to be excluded.
I agree with that, and I'd like to be able to help people right away and do a long-term thing, because we're always having this conversation and we never get to the long-term thing. I know we've been talking about forever the shortage of skills trade, and we are still talking about it. And so I would like to see both, some way to look at both a long-term piece as well.
Thanks for the question.
And
you got another minute.
I got another minute, Rolf. Martha, I'm just wondering if, just for a non-technical person, the new piece you're talking about, is it exactly the same as the one that's expiring, or it's different and it's providing you a chance to sort of be able to okay.
It's different.
The other one's expired, and now this one, something new needs to happen. It would be better.
Right.
Sort
this
of.
is to yes. It's different.
That's the untechnical way to say it.
Just could you lay that answer out a little bit, Ms. Durden, because if it's not on the record, it doesn't exist.
Thank you.
What expired was a tax credit. This is a credit on growing capital, so it's on the growth of capital. It's a different model of credit.
Thank you for that. Turning to Mr. McKinnon, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci tout le monde.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank everyone. We've heard lots of presentations of interest and a very diversified group, and I think that it's been quite revealing. I'd like to put a number of questions, perhaps first of all to Mr. Louis, but I would like to note the presence in this room. The third Vice Chair of the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, a proud Gatinoise, Madame Sylvie Garneau, who is with us, and I'd like to thank you for coming. We always appreciate your contributions. We often hear that this particular debate relating to infrastructure investment, even though municipalities are not in a position to ensure that spending takes place quickly enough for the economy to feel the effects quickly. Can you talk about the ability of municipalities to take on the funding and to do something quickly so that this money is spent soon, so that it does in fact stimulate the economy?
Recognizing my third Vice President, Sylvie Garneau, is present as well. The question is a very appropriate one, I think, in that we do have shovel-ready and shovel-worthy projects ready for implementation. We have a dearth of projects that have been waiting for funding for many years, in fact. What we're prioritizing, though, is that we, in understanding that we are in a particular economic environment, that repair and refurbishment of existing infrastructure is, although not sexy, is important for Canadians to maintain the level of service that they rely upon. A catastrophic failure of any of these types of infrastructure it would be catastrophic not just for the individual but for the economy of Canada. That fully this infrastructure that we had a report card submitted that was published in coordination with 3 other entities highlighted that fully a third of our infrastructure under municipal control, and that's 60% of infrastructure in Canada, a third of it was at fair or worse condition. And so the repair and maintenance of these types of facilities is appropriate for the government to invest into.
Et j'assume peut être déployé assez rapidement.
I assume that the money will be spent fairly quickly. For example, in Gatineau, we talk about an infrastructure deficit of $1.3 billion without even taking into account new strategic projects. We're talking about the basic infrastructure, water, sewers, roadworks, $1.3 billion. So this would be consistent with the experience in other cities.
Projects are ready to go. In my home region, where I'm the Vice Chair of Metro Vancouver, we have a $700 million secondary wastewater treatment plant that needs some assurance of funding, whether it be federal and hopefully provincial as well. But it goes to us having the tools and accessing the financing that's made available. And that's why we're advocating for a better financing formula, one where we're guaranteed or have the confidence that the funding is available to us rather than going through an application-based project. That in rural communities, they need to understand that there's more money available. We're advocating for a doubling of the Small Communities Fund and reallocating of some of the previous New Build Canada funding to make it more accessible to the local government, given that we only receive 8 to 10 cents of every tax dollar and have 60% of the infrastructure. It's impossible for us to implement some of these programs and projects that are shovel-ready and shovel-worthy.
Merci. Je pense que vous avez très bien renforcé.
Thank you. I think that you did make the point. I'd like now to put a question to Madame Lantier, and I'd like to congratulate the FCFA. I have a long experience in the area of official languages and the particular situation of francophones in a minority situation. I'm a graduate of Moncton University. And I look back with nostalgia. Mr. Dion's plan, he's now Minister of Global Affairs. You talked about the fact that in the past 11 years, funding has not been indexed. Can you tell me what the impact of this cut has been over this period on the situation of francophones in a minority situation? I think that this depends on the places. There are areas where there are community organizations that have had to shut down because they're unable to pay their staff with their present level of resources. There are places where organizations are extremely attentive to their spending, but I would say that the fundamental basic effect has been it is difficult to take into account new requirements and to make progress in relation to the situation 10 years ago. When we talked, for example, about Francophone immigration, early childcare, and education, the school requirements, all of these are areas where we must be active, and we don't necessarily have resources that have been keeping up. This has slowed down our development, and in certain cases that has resulted in a regression. There are various letters of mandate from the ministers, including the letter from the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Can you tell us something about the relevance of this letter and what possible effect it might have on your expectations when it comes to promotion of official languages? In the letter of mandate of the government, there is a reference to developing an official languages plan for Francophone communities in cooperation with these communities. This is something that we hope for because it enable us to take a stock of what has been done so far and to discuss the present needs so that we can respond to them.
Mr. Elboutef.
Well, thank you all for all the wonderful presentation. The first question basically to to Dr. Reagan, if I may call you. You've mentioned a few good things and important stuff, and I would like to get from you a brief on the Paris Convention, the Canadian government commitment of fund to the United Nations program on the environment, and whether you repeated twice, don't rush ourselves to any quick decision. The question is, have we rushed, or have this government rushed to the commitment of fund that we've committed to? Yes or no, and how can that be done better?
I'm not sure I understood the question. I thought I heard you ask about a commitment to a fund. Is that?
Yes, that's true. My understanding that there's a fund that Canada contributed to as part of $100 billion fund that the United Nations is collecting to be basically spent in areas where for countries that to become more responsible environmentally, and whether you have any idea about that program or not is the question. $2.6 billion commitment from
This is a good question, and I have to claim ignorance. So I know that the Canadian government has committed to that. I think it's currently a $100 billion fund, largely from the developed countries to the developing countries. But I do not know the details of how those resources will be spent. I think that is one small part of a very large and very complex international negotiation. So my emphasis here is about the Canadian government and the provincial governments developing a coherent pan-Canadian policy to cost-effectively reduce emissions. And I think that's where we need to make sure we take the time and get the details right.
My next question to Mr. Louis. I read here on page 14, you're talking about realigned P3 Canada. I seem to have difficulty understanding the P3 model that you're presenting here. If you can elaborate on that and explain to us further. Because as I said, I mean, I'm in favor of a P3 program where there's more private equity involvement or private investment, especially when it comes to the capital, to initial capital on that, rather than relying on our governments from municipal to federal to provincial to spend the money on such expensive expansion as a result of what you're proposing. So if you'd like to explain that.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me state that I've had the opportunity to vote on two P3 projects. One I voted in favor of, one I did not. And so that to highlight that not that I am open-minded, but rather that not all P3 projects are created equal. What we're saying at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is that we need the flexibility to determine at a local level whether or not it makes sense for a P3 project to proceed, not have me forced through a P3 screening process. And we need the flexibility in order to make that local determination. And it really is, it should be made, the point should be made that a P3 funding model is just that. It's a funding model which is a loan, which needs to be repaid, and there's a cost premium for a theoretical risk transfer. It doesn't necessarily always play out on the city side or in fact, the citizen side or the resident side. What we're asking for at the Federation of Municipalities is more of a model where we're receiving funding, a grant, because it's not the inability to access capital, which is what we're coming up against. Local governments have a AAA credit rating. British Columbia, joint and severally liable, we can borrow at the best rates possible. City of Vancouver, AA+, positive ratings, and this is not an issue for most municipalities. What we're asking for is that rather than delaying projects that are meaningful, that are shovel-ready, shovel-worthy, are being delayed as a result of having gone through or needing to go through a P3 screening process. And so we're saying the risk transference and analysis may bear some value, but it depends on each particular project.
One more? Quick. Okay, just a quick question to Mr. Smiley. On the, do we have shortage or do we have surplus or are we balanced on the skilled workers in Canada? and how balanced that the distribution of skilled workers across Canada. If you can brief us on that, please.
So we can't change demographics. What we do know is that in the next 15 years, there's going to be a tsunami of retirements in construction and in the skilled trades. We cannot change the mode age of my membership, which is 52. That's the most frequent age. So what we have to do is get the training file completely right for young people to replace the skills that are going to be walking away from job sites. So we have ups and downs in our economy, in the various regional economies in Canada. And so at any given time, anywhere in the country, we might have a small surplus or a small shortage, but essentially, even amongst industrial employers in Alberta today, if you talk to the big producers, they're having shutdowns in a sequential way to maintain their $4 or $5 billion facilities. There's still a scramble to find people. And so it's about demographics, and it's about the investment in the training system, and it's about getting that file right.
Thank you. Very important information. Just coming out of that discussion, Mr. Parliamentary Secretary, I guess we don't know if there's a $2.5 billion commitment from Canada to a $100 billion international fund to combat climate change in the development world that comes out of the complicated negotiations in Paris. Could you check that out? I think it'll be likely a question for the minister on Tuesday when he comes in any event, if you could check it out. Mr. Obutov?
Yeah, the number is $2.6 billion. That's what the Prime Minister committed to that program.
Over 3 years.
Over 3 years.
Over 3 years. Okay, then we'll get the facts on it if we can. Turning to Mr. Sabera, 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Most of my comments will be with Mr. Smiley. Mr. Smiley, from the riding of Vaughan Woodbridge, I'm proud to have the Carpenters District Council of Ontario there.
Yes, sir.
I've been to the training facility many times. My father's a retired carpenter, sheet metal worker. There is, an individual called it an oasis. I think I do. In York Region, we're having a little oasis right now because there is a lot of construction activity. There's a lot of infrastructure taking place. There's a lot of home building taking place. So there is a shortage of carpenters and framers. It'd be great to see some of those unfortunately laid off workers in Alberta come over. There's work. I think we need to do that. I applaud the effort on the mobility measure. I think it's well needed. The demographics, though, we are going to be in a couple years seeing a big wall of retirees
yes.
Happen. And this has got to be a joint effort between business and unions and government and nonprofits, and because I think we really need to change the mindset of young workers. I think when you speak to people today and their parents, and how many parents encourage their kids to become welders. My father-in-law is 70 years old and he's still welding in his own business because there's such a demand still and there's not enough welders coming up. So are there any measures that you guys are looking at in terms of, your organization is looking at in terms of the apprenticeships, getting more folks going that way?
So one of the things we've had success with on major projects are the builder or the owner of the asset saying to contractors, in order to build on this site or in order to participate in building this site, you must hire and have A, a training plan within your RFP documents, and B, you commit to train when you're working on this project. So Shell Canada, for instance, has a number of projects in Alberta which have been successful in attracting First Nations workers and women in the skilled trades because Shell requires it of their contractors. They say, in order to do business with us, you must do A, B, C, and D. And so if we're going to spend $60 billion on infrastructure to rebuild this country, it might not be a bad thing to take a look at requiring these same sorts of things on federal infrastructure projects, or even shared funded projects between the feds, provinces and municipal governments. Why wouldn't we use these projects to increase participation in apprenticeships and encourage companies to train young people? At the end of the day, everything we do all day, every day, is brought to you by the people in the building trades, sort of the invisible workforce out there. But if you like driving to work and you like flying on an airplane, or you like taking a train, or you like the heating systems in this building, it's brought to you by people that have these skills and training. And so skilled trades, to me, is the entrance way to entrepreneurship. So being an apprentice welder today means running your own business in 10 years. Yeah. And so these are the kinds of things we need to promote.
Because I think what's happened in Ontario specifically is, due to the provincial government's ramp up in infrastructure spending, because there was such a large infrastructure deficit that was left over from prior administrations, and now we're going to step up on the federal side, is that there is a large draw or a large need for skilled trades, and we're seeing that, and I think we need to plan accordingly, not just for now, but also for a decade from now, where a lot of individuals will be setting up ready to retire. And these are very well-paying jobs.
I should have been
offer
an
great
electrician,
features and great benefits for their workers. Mr. Louie, just quickly on FCM, $1 investment in infrastructure is $1.64 benefit to the economy. We're obviously ran on a platform for $125 billion of spending over 10 years. I think it's great that we can look to refurbishment of existing stock of assets initially, and also new projects to go ahead. I think that's the best way to proceed, and that's my view on the issue. I think my other colleagues have addressed the other issues with regards to FCM. So I'll leave it at that. I'm finished, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And turning to Ms. Raitt, 5 minutes.
Mr. Smiley, starting with you, please. As you were speaking, ironically enough, an article came out indicating that it is projected by a report that 84% of oil sands construction jobs are going to disappear in the next 4 years. So at what point does this become a crisis in your eyes, and needing of serious governmental intervention?
So north of 55% of the building trades membership goes to work every day on some sort of energy project, be that oil and gas, pipelines, nuclear facilities, and so the energy portfolio, which includes oil sands, is an important part, and there's no question that cancelled projects in Alberta will have an impact on the job prospects of our membership. Yeah. I will say that there is enough work associated with maintaining existing facilities, which are there already, so the upgraders and the extraction facilities, to ensure that there isn't a complete decimation in the industry. Okay. So, in fact, the maintenance hours have now, because of economic conditions over the last 5 years, maintenance hours have surpassed new construction hours as it is. So, fair point. And look, with changes in Canada's economy, we'll have to pivot.
Right. I'm from Cape Breton, and I read...
Didn't know.
I know. Well, everyone should know. Because I tell them every day. Two things I tell you. I'm from Cape Breton. I have 2 sons. Anyway, both things I'm very proud of. I read something today on an economist based out in Cape Breton, and he's done an analysis of mobility issues that you were talking about earlier, and this is what he said. He said, mining the Alberta oil sands is as important to the Cape Breton economy now as mining coal was in the 1980s. It's just an incredible, important safety valve that we had in Cape Breton for so many years to ensure that there was some kind of help. I fully support whatever ideas you bring to the table on labor mobility, because it's what's kept the island going for the last 10 years. So I look forward to seeing what else, and I'm echoing what Ron said about the same thing. I'm very curious to see what you come up with, and I commend you on continuing on that work. I'm going to ask Canadian Taxpayers Federation a question, because that's kind of my wheelhouse too. Aaron, you mentioned before that one of the things that you're concerned about is controlling public sector pay. What you may notice is that the Liberal government is gearing up next week or the week after to introduce legislation to repeal the work that we did with respect to disability in healthcare. With respect to sick leave and disability, replacing it with short-term disability. Any comments on the move that the Liberal government's making and what your perspective is from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation?
Well, obviously, with the change in government, we watch very closely the change in policy. And with the new Treasury Board president, we certainly saw what he presented as a change in tone. We have no problem with changes in tone if that's entirely his prerogative. But we do think, as I stressed earlier, we don't begrudge union leaders advocating hard for their membership. That's what they're there to do. But the government must always bear in mind that there are millions of other Canadians who do not work in the public service, and they rely on the government to represent their interests. So they should drive as hard a bargain as the leaders are negotiating with.
Very good. Thank you.
Time for one quick. We'll go to Robert, and then that'll give him 3 minutes, and then we'll be closed.
Not getting an extra question, or I am?
I didn't think you wanted one.
I always want more time.
Okay,
Come
we'll
on,
give
Mr.
you
Chair.
20 seconds. Go ahead.
I'm just going to give a shout out to Mr. Louis, Acting Mayor. Clark Somerville is the incoming president of FCM, I believe, and he made a very good presentation to me in the riding, of course, talking about the difficulties with respect to the application process on infrastructure amounts. So his points were well taken, and I thank you for being here today as well. Good to see you again. That's it. That didn't hurt at all, did it, Mr.
Didn't
Chair?
hurt at all, and
Exactly.
she kept it on time.
Exactly.
Mr. Ouellette, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I have 3 questions for 3 different people, so we'll all have to be very concise and share. So my first question is to Mr. Woodrick from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I was just wondering, should the federal government subsidize the oil and gas industry?
We oppose subsidies to oil and gas. We oppose subsidies to aerospace, to the auto sector. We oppose public sector subsidy of private sector businesses.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next question is for Mr. Smiley. My question is related to apprentices. It seems that there's many employers that hire, or some that hire apprentices, and others companies do not in the construction industry. And so some bear the unfair burden of training people, and which are then cherry-picked by other companies. Do you believe that somehow the federal government should include in their infrastructure spending a requirement that the companies actually have a certain level of apprentices within that within their group right across the board to ensure that there's a fair level playing field?
I would agree with that.
Okay. This is going well. I'm having maybe I might have an extra question.
No, look, it's about what you want to do in terms of public policy to build Canada. And so, yes, I would agree with your statement. And it shouldn't be a voluntary system that was put in by the previous government. It should be a mandatory system of including apprentices on federal government jobs.
Thank you very much. And maybe I'll add an extra question, but the next one is concerning cooperatives for banking. In Winnipeg Centre, it's very poor riding. We use an awful lot of those cash types of corporations where high usury rates are paid by many people, and it seems that the co-ops haven't been able to fill the marketplace. Do you believe there's a role perhaps for the Postal Canada Post to play with their charter that exists since 1923, I believe, in that market, and even in rural areas for people to cash checks?
I would say that credit unions are working hard to try and help in communities where they have those other organizations. There's some work that's been done in Vancouver. Van City has a similar kind of short-term loan structure that has worked out fairly well. Ontario just announced recently that they're working with the provincial government to work on payday loan types of organizations. So I would say that credit unions are fairly well placed to work with the provincial governments mostly to try and support communities that are underserved by banks and others.
Thank you very much.
Thank
and I have
you. And no, we're
5 seconds.
No, we're out of time. Just to the witnesses, thank you very much for your presentations. They were very informative, good discussion. To committee members, and thanks to committee members for their endurance. This has been 3 fairly long days. Tomorrow morning we meet at room C110 down by 110 down by the in the Wellington building at 8 till 11. And then we'll meet in the next room over from here from 12:30 to 3:30, and C110 at 8, and here in the afternoon. And I'd suggest you have lunch in the lobby before you come, because we're not providing lunch tomorrow. So thank you. Meeting adjourned.